All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Sharpest College Football Podcast, the 2024 Season Futures episode. This is BuckMetrics, joined by Robert Martin, and we have a special guest this week. Robert, things are wonderful here in beautiful Newport Beach, California. It's warm but beautiful. How are things up in the province of Ontario?
Pretty good. Actually, it was nice and warm today, but tomorrow we're getting the remnants of that hurricane, that Gulf Coast hurricane. Again, nothing to be particularly worried about. It's just going to be some rain for us. But yeah, it's been so warm here the last couple of days. Getting some rain just to make sure the grass doesn't die is kind of nice.
Nice. Okay. As I said, we have a guest this podcast episode to go over our futures for 2024. Jackson Blackwell at JB underscore Futures King specializes in futures across all kinds of sports, correct?
Primarily college football this year. It seems that I'm pivoting towards that, but I do dabble in obviously NFL, women's tennis, a little bit of Formula One, and wherever there's value.
Women's tennis, wherever there's value. I love that, man. Our kind of guy. So thank you for joining us. Looking forward to this episode. Been looking forward to this for quite a while. All right. So 3 segments. We'll see how long each of them goes. First, we're going to go over the conference champion futures bets, then season win totals, and then bets on national champions and Heisman futures, excuse me. Before we get into any kind of ideas or plays for the conference champs, just a couple of things I wanted to just go over. Obviously, as you said, wherever there's value, the guiding principle here is not the most likely result. We're not tourists looking to bet on our favorite alma mater in Vegas for $10 just to have a little bit of fun for the season. We are looking for value, correct? Even if it's third, fourth, or fifth most likely. We've got to put those in a portfolio basically and just over the long term, hopefully come out positive. Secondly, I'm curious, Jackson, since you specialize in futures and I'm a dilettante at best, sizing of plays. I'm curious. Now, season win totals, I can basically just take like my season win total bankroll. I can just right size based on what I think my edge is. Conference champs is a little different. I don't really know how to even start calculating an edge. Do you get a feel for an edge that you have, or is it more of an instinct rather than an actual calculation?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that there's an art and a science to it. Sometimes you see numbers that you're assuming the markets are going to move, and you want to get as much down as you can. Other times, I'm using the Kelly criterion. I always want to try to set up long shot bets with an opportunity to hedge down the road potentially. So if I'm taking a 30-1 future ticket, obviously I don't want to overextend myself and have like too much action. I don't want to put 10% of my bankroll on something that's going to have me take out a loan eventually if I want to get out. I'm usually trying to size, obviously, the shorter odds bets I'm going to have a little bit more action on. I'm going to sprinkle long shots for the most part. And yeah, I'm building models now. It's a little bit different than the type of stuff you guys are doing. I'm trying to find fair odds. I think one of the most important things that someone trying to get into futures betting should pay attention to is convert odds to percentages. If you're going to look at these 30-1s and 10-1s, convert all of the odds across the board just to easy numbers that you can see, compare different prices between sports books, and you'll see discrepancies. For instance, earlier in the year, I saw that NC State and North Carolina had the same odds to win the ACC. Just the eye test alone told me that one of these numbers is wrong. Yeah, there's definitely some math behind it, and lots of Excel spreadsheets are being made and created. But there's definitely some of the eye test that goes into it.
Do you use any of the season win totals to inform what kind of edge you think you're getting in the conference champ bets, or do you just throw those out because you're playing against those season win totals?
I think that they're relevant, but not everything. Now that it's a little bit later in the summer, we're seeing like conference win totals posted. So I think that might be a little bit more pertinent, but it's not incredibly useful. Don't get me wrong. You can definitely use that information, but incorporating projected wins and losses versus non-conference opponents, things of that nature, it doesn't seem like that's 100% the way to go, but I definitely think that you can use those numbers, if anything, for a reference point.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly. Just one input, basically, hopefully of many, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. One other question before we dig in a little bit. It seems that just in our prep for this, you had bets down months ago, correct?
Yeah, I actually placed my first national championship futures bet on January 1st. That was before the championship game was even played. I've got master documents that I've built where I've gone through transfer portal, pretty much all the Phil Steele stuff a couple months in advance. Yeah, I've been looking at college football since before the season ended last year. But abrupt sad ending for me. I had a Washington plus 3,000 ticket that I bought in probably week 4 or week 5, and I didn't hedge. So I'm definitely looking forward at getting some redemption in 2024.
Oh man, I'm sorry about that. Are you digging through each school's athletic department website just for who's going to return and building out depth charts, or just you only looking at key positions?
I'm looking at sites like 24/7 Sports to see what's going
Okay.
on with the transfer portal. Obviously, incoming recruiting classes are important. I think that, yeah, definitely going through and scraping official rosters on university websites is important. Might get some random tidbits of information there about maybe somebody coming back or that's not on the team any longer. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of work, and it's something I enjoy doing. The process is almost as fun as making the bets and seeing them play out. There's a lot of data scraping going on in a number of different places.
Yes, and I think, thank you. I think my next slide will get to that. You can either data scrape or I wait for Phil Steele to come out and I actually handwrite out all the returning experience for all the offensive lines and every defensive starting position. So I'm so proud of myself this year. I got it done. The online version helps this go. It takes weeks out of the process. But I actually find that actually writing and going through, Robert tried to help me out to automate it. And I said, you know what, writing this stuff out, you really get a feel for. If you're writing a bunch of high numbers for one team, you think, I better take a look at this. If you want a bunch of zeros, not to cheat, but when I was writing out the returning talent for Air Force, it was pretty quick. And I said, wow, there's not a lot returning here. We'll get into them in a second. Yeah, the preparation is a big part of the process, just digging in. So with that, I organized this as a series of, I'm a big horse racing fan. So I saw these as 10, 10, 9 discrete horse races. And when I'm handicapping a horse race, the first thing that I do is I say, how is this favorite? Is this a solid favorite? Am I comfortable fading the favorite? Am I not comfortable going with or against? Or do I really just want to get on this favorite? I've organized this from high to low in terms of my confidence in fading each of these favorites in each of the conferences here. So these odds are, as a couple days ago, from the idiots at DraftKings who are horrible at their jobs, and we mention that every week. So with that, we will start with, you can see here basically my confidence, and this is just my opinion. This is not Robert's or Jackson's, and we will basically agree where we agree and have good times when we disagree. So we will start with the ACC. I've got the conference overview here just to explain this to everybody. Obviously, got the teams here. We've got last year's luck. And just a reminder, the luck tends to regress unless you're basically returning an outstanding quarterback. So the numbers in the positive numbers in red, like for Florida State, means they had 2.7 wins worth of good luck last season. Some coaches just tend to recur on the good luck scale. Some tend to find themselves on the bad luck. Typically, they are horrible coaches that coach in the state of Pennsylvania. We have basically, for the offense here, last year's Team Apex, that's their QB rating. GGAB, that's basically how effective they were running the ball. Higher is better. Ryan, receiving yards above Noob, that's also the higher the better. This is how much Ryan they lost from last year's roster. This is how much Ryan they picked up through the portal to get to basically a retained Ryan of this year versus last year. This is last year's offensive power rating, quarterback, how many returning starts for this team a quarterback has, how many career starts they have, last season's apex, and then offensive lines returning starts from last season for this team, career starts, the improvement metric, higher is better, the prime starts, basically how many of the projected starters starts over this season will be in their prime, basically starts 20 or above. For the defensive apex last season, defensive GGAB, lower is better for apex, actually higher is better for GGAB. That's basically how many yards they stopped, if you will. Uh, Defensive Ryan, lower is better. This is their defensive power rating. And then the same OL metrics here for the defense and their total power rating for last season. So I use this as a starting point. I basically, for each conference, put the DraftKings odds for conference title at the bottom of each one. Starting with the ACC, I will go. I think you're first here. Let me. Oh, yeah, okay. No, sorry. I will go first. I'm very comfortable fading Florida State here. They lose a lot. They lose Keon Coleman. They came on in defense last season. They were lucky last season. They did not return Jordan Travis. And in his stead is DJU. I need to be convinced, and when we get to the ACC preview, we will definitely dig into that. But basically, against the better defenses last season, he did not thrive, to put it kindly. SMU stats here. Now, these metrics are normalized on the power ratings for strength of opponent. SMU, I have them number 2 here. I like them here. They return a lot. They return arguably the best quarterback in Preston Stone. They return a ton of receiving talent over here. Defense, they were great, and they return a lot of experience. I like them. I also like Virginia Tech. Little harder to suss them out here. Year 3 of Brett Pry, I like that. A lot of returning talent here on the offensive line. If it's now or never in terms of whether he's going to turn this defense around, it's been a slow build like design. I think if it's going to happen, it'll be this year. Like longer odds that Virginia Tech offers. I'm very comfortable, if you're familiar at all with the podcast, fading Mario Cristobal on anything. Louisville, I will wait to see how Jeff Brom does with Tyler Shuck. North Carolina, Max Johnson, no thank you. You can have him. And the underreported, I think, elsewhere story is that Cade Klubnik, I think, basically stinks, and I need to be convinced otherwise. My plays here in the ACC, I like SMU at 1,600 for a larger play and just a smaller play in Virginia Tech, if at all. That's what I like, and I think I've got your play here. You like NC State here, Jackson.
Yeah, I am, but just as you mentioned, value is what we were looking for in this podcast, and yeah, you definitely cannot find NC State 15-1 now. I loved them at that number. 7-1, I don't really hate them, but yeah, just to get it rolling. This team just gives me, from the schedule, vibes of Louisville last year, a team that I think was probably worse than the top 3 or 4 teams in the ACC, but they just had the easiest schedule, and ultimately they found their way into the title game. I did end up hedging out of that one, so that was one of those ones that worked out. I said before I made the bet, if they play Florida State or Clemson, I'm getting out of there. So that one ended up working out in my favor. But yeah, the Wolfpack, they only face one of the top 6 teams expected to win the conference by odds. They play at Clemson. That number opened at plus 10.5, and the look-aheads, I want to say it's around 7 now. So definitely still a pretty big underdog, but goes to show you that the steam is coming in on NC State. Yeah, no Florida State, no Miami, no Louisville, no Virginia Tech, no SMU. Only 4 true road games in the conference. They're fairly manageable outside of the Clemson game. Georgia Tech, North Carolina, at Cal. I project them as favorites in 10 out of their 12 games this year. I project them a favorite in every game, except for at Clemson, obviously. A lot of guys returning. Transfer portal for NC State this year. I'm really high on quarterbacks that are coming back for their 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th years, and teams that are injecting money through NIL. And the Wolfpack, they made the Final Four in men's basketball, Final Four in women's basketball. The baseball team made the College World Series. And I think that they're trying to make a push in the state of North Carolina. A lot of the guys that they're bringing back, or a lot of the guys that they're bringing in through the portal, rather, North Carolina guys coming in from other states that have left, like Hollywood Smothers, guys like that. Jordan Waters from Duke at the running back position should be a huge upgrade. And one of my favorite quarterbacks in all of college football since 2020, Grayson McCall at quarterback. He looked amazing in the spring game. He's got over 10,000 career passing yards. Regressed a little bit in 2023. Could be due to a coaching change. Did have a head injury. I expect him to bounce back at the P5 level this year, or I guess P4 now that Pac-12 is gone. But I'm really high on this team. 7-1, not loving it as much, but definitely a team that at 15-1, I'm very bullish on that price.
Yeah, boy, you really grabbed some value there. Agree, the schedule, like literally, if you just wanted to pick names out of a hat or just do like a fantasy draft of who you wanted, the only thing I would change here is getting Clemson at home and trade that for maybe to add a Wake Forest or something. I need to be convinced on Grayson McCall away from Jamie Chadwell. That's the only concern I have. Now, in fairness, Tim Beck can ruin basically any quarterback. So to your point, it's not like he's done. But you grabbed a nice one here. Robert, what do you think about the ACC?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I think my biggest, just fundamental thought, actually, if you just go back a couple slides to your initial one with all the ratings there, this is, I feel the chart you've assembled here is like the first time that Clemson is being accurately portrayed, because I looked at the futures probably pretty early on as well. I didn't check them daily, but I remember basically right initially Florida State and Clemson were basically tied for in the futures market. They were basically dead even. It was like a which one's the favorite? It's a coin flip, and Clemson should not have been that high. They should have decidedly been a lot lower. I think a lot of people just price in this Dabo Sweeney will get this. Oh, it's just
Yep.
one more year. They'll be there. Don't worry. And Miami is again more hype, Mario Cristobal hype, right? I feel like those two are just. You see this a lot in a lot of futures markets where hype around certain coaches and hype around certain players is massively overpriced, and I think Clemson is a prime example of that, as well as Miami, right? So I think not only is it important to find value, but it's important to find the opposite of value, like the dead money in the pool, right? Like
Exactly.
sometimes I know gravitating to value, it's relatively harder to find value, but in some cases it's really easy to find like that is not value. That is not value, right? And I think just saying, okay, that's not a bet, that's the thing. Florida State is interesting though. The question about Florida State is the fact that yeah, okay, on paper they've lost some stuff. They brought back DJU, okay. I mean, they brought back because he was from the ACC initially, but the question becomes, was Florida State good last year because Mike Norvell is a good coach and has them performing at a high level, or was it just a function of Jordan Travis, Keon Coleman, etc., and also Trey Benson? He's now an Arizona Cardinal as well. What was the reason for that? Now, Mike Norvell had struggled for a few years at Florida State, kind of had them going again, but that was with Jordan Travis, right? The question is, how much of this was the players or how much of it is the coach, right? This, I think, is the fundamental season of, is Mike Norvell an elite coach in the game, right? And I think what he's able to do with the pieces, although not as many pieces as he had last year, but definitely still pieces here. Depending on what he's able to do here, that this could really cement whether or not he is an elite coach in the game. So I don't love Florida State at plus 290, but at the same time, if there was a team that I think could make it in, if you were like, okay, NC State versus say Florida State or SMU versus someone else, I think Florida State might be that second team in there. Yeah, I like, because remember again, the nice thing about the conference championship games is again 2 teams get in, right? And at that point, then whatever the spread is, right? But I think that while you can throw something on your favorite, I do like the NC State and the SMU plays. Don't completely neglect Florida State there. I think Florida State is probably going to be that other team as compared to that other kind of long shot team.
Yeah, very fair. I just want to point out one thing too, as he's been criticized about. We can see here Clemson picked up Zero and Ryan, a very nice big school, and they just don't want to play in the transfer portal. So good for you guys.
Purity there. That's purity there for you.
Yeah. All right. So my play and Jackson's play. All right. Next conference is the American. I'll go. I'll let you go first, Jackson. I'll just come back to my. You've got a couple of plays or ideas here.
Yeah, so I did play Memphis at plus 350 at Circa. One of the main things that I always advocate is shop lines. Definitely check for prices everywhere. That's one thing, as I brought up with converting odds to percentages, is that if something moves from 30 to 1 to 29 to 1, that is not the same as something moving from plus 300 to plus 200. The percentages that change through that are the odds are fooling you a little bit. American odds are definitely trying to get you to see those big numbers and get you to put some money down. So just something to consider. I make Memphis with my model fair about plus 300. I think we're seeing numbers like that somewhere in that plus 225 to plus 300 range for the most part at the books that I have access to. Memphis this year, though, I make them the best team in the conference. The only problem is they also have the toughest schedule. So the opposite route of how I'm going in the ACC. They do face Tulane, UTSA, and USF on the road. I do think that there might be a little bit of a hedge opportunity in the last week of the season when they do play at Tulane. But I'm a little bit lower on Tulane this year. I think losing your head coach and your starting quarterback, I think that's got to be worth at least a couple points to the spread in every game. And then UTSA, I'm a big Frank Harris guy. He made me a lot of money whenever he played with that team. Unfortunately, they weren't able to capture the conference last year, and I did lose a little bit on that. But overall, I think that losing your starting quarterbacks in some of these teams could end up going a long way. Anyways, bunch of returning starters, the best offense in the AAC by a long shot. Seth Hennigan, returning for your starting quarterback. Obviously, that's going to be huge. My only problem is if he goes down, who's the backup? I couldn't tell you. Not only are you trying to look at the ceiling on some of these teams, but also the floor. So that's one of the things that I'm considering. You lose your starting quarterback of 4 years. That's going to be a big deal in college football. So plus 220, not a bet for me. If you can find somewhere in that plus 300 range, I think Memphis is worth a shot. And then you have opportunities down the road to decide what you want to do.
One other point on that, you make a great point. I think just to reinforce, because I always bring it back to USC because I'm just a homer that way. Memphis isn't growing backup quarterback on trees like we do here in California. So to your point, especially if you're in a G5 program, it can get really shaky and just the mystery box in terms of what you're getting your backup quarterbacks when you've had a guy like Hennigan who's been there forever. But agree. And so then you also had an idea, UTSA at plus 500, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, so I think at the current prices, obviously, like I said, Memphis plus 350, you're probably not going to find that now. But if you're going to bet something today, I think the UTSA plus 500 is probably what I would go with. They don't play USF or Tulane in the regular season, face Memphis at home, so that obviously could work out in their favor. But is the drop off at quarterback too much for Frank Harris being gone? That's one of my biggest concerns. Got the best returning running back units in the AAC. I think that they'll be able to run over some bad defenses. If I did play UTSA at plus 500, that would probably be more like an NC State bet where I'd probably look more to hedge in the title game. But I think that plus 500 is about a fair number.
Yeah. Just to go off your idea about Frank Harris, apparently he might have been injured at the beginning of last year and they really struggled. And that makes me concerned to your point about how much of the success under Traylor has been Frank Harris versus clearly he's a good coach. Is he a title contending coach in the American without Frank Harris? I think that's to be determined as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to go back to my graphic here. Agree with you on Tulane. We've been huge Willie Fritz fans for a long time. Interesting when a slow bill coach like him leaves and you got John Summerall, who literally brought Troy to the title game, I think in his first season, taking over Troy. So that's interesting. But again, he's a defensive guy and he's got a new quarterback. I just need to be convinced, just like you. Got my semi concerns about Frank Harris moving on from UTSA. Memphis, my metrics actually have Hennigan as a pretty good, but not really, oh my God, this guy can never lose quarterback. Apex of 112 is nice. Definitely he's not going to cost you a bunch of games, but it's not a guy who's just never going to lose one for you. That takes me to a really weird spot here. Team so much before last season, and I still can't believe I'm going to land here. They had 2 games of bad luck last season. They have, by my metrics, the best returning quarterback in Jacob Zeno. He's probably got more upside than Hennigan too, and last year was Zeno's first year as a starter. UAB's defense was rough last season. It's not really projected to improve, but I see enough holes in them where in basically everybody ahead of them, I think 3,000 plus 3,000 is not a bad price on UAB. And 12 months ago, if you told me I'd be saying this, I don't know what I'd say other than just you're out of your mind. So Rob, do you have something between a sane take and what I've landed on here?
Yeah, this one's really hard. A lot of people are on Memphis there. Obviously, Seth Hennigan, I think, very clearly the best quarterback in the American, probably by a long shot. And people remember how good that Memphis team was last year. It was really good in a lot of those games. But that being said, though, I think the act of people saying, "Oh, this Memphis team is so good," and so much steam being put on this Memphis team, that kind of takes away the value of it a bit, right? You obviously don't want to get that at 2-1. You want that a lot higher. The problem, though, is who else, right? Okay, yeah, UTSA, they do lose Frank Harris. I think their backup played in, I believe, the bowl game, what it was that he had some time in the bowl game. Didn't do a lot, to be fair, didn't really need to do a lot. Anyways, it's really hard to see. All I know is that there will probably be some team that rises up here. Yeah. UTSA could. I agree. Fading Tulane. I think they're that's about 2 seasons ago. That's not current, but Yeah, I don't know who's going to rise up. South Florida, maybe you could take a shot there. They did some stuff last year. They compared with Alabama, but it's really like, again, this is just even then they're plus 600, right? This is grasping at straws here. You're like, I don't
Yeah.
like any of these plays particularly. This is, you're either on Memphis or not. One more thing I do want to say though about Jackson's point earlier about comparing money lines and probabilities is actually such a huge part of this too, because like sometimes from in my modeling, in my more game to game modeling, especially in some of the esports, I'll have something priced at, sometimes it's, oh, I have this priced at plus 130 and the book is plus 150. That's, it's not a lot of value there. It's like a couple points of value, right? Now, if I have it priced at minus 120, that's value, right? But when you just look at that numerical difference of, oh, it's like 100, it's, oh, it was plus 500, now it's plus 300, it seems like a big difference, but it's actually not really. And it's very tricky sometimes to make sure that you're actually seeing real value and not just, oh, this is just basically a rounding error.
Yep, agree. So are you gonna make an actual play, an idea here? South Florida, with that, I'll say it nicely, with a defense that really has a lot of room for improvement. At plus 600, they can't stop anybody. Um,
Yeah, I think this is a Memphis or pass for
wow.
me.
Okay. All right. Who we got next here? The Big 12. I think I'm going to go first. Let me just make sure here. Yeah, I will go first here. I was overly bullish on Iowa State last season. We actually joked before week one that the gambling scandal would be beneficial to them because Hunter Deckers is so bad, and it would just. We said, it's going to force them to go to the next quarterback. It's going to help them in the long run. And I think it actually turned out that way. Rocco Becht had a really good freshman season. They retain a lot of, actually, they come out ahead in their 24 Ryan versus their 23 Ryan because they lost so little and they added to the portal. Very tough pass defense, good run defense, a lot of green in the defensive experience metrics. So they should be even tougher. They've only had one defense basically since they got it together about 5 years ago that hasn't been outstanding, and that was 2 years ago. And that's a staple of Campbell and Heacock is just really good defenses. The power rating is from last season. I think they will actually probably exceed that, giving the returning talent at quarterback, at receiving positions, and on defense. I like them at a very juicy plus 1,000. I know that, Jackson, you feel differently from me, so let me jump ahead to you then.
I wouldn't say that I feel differently as much as when I made the bets I made. Just the prices made more sense for me to make the bets I did. But yeah, so Utah, I grabbed them at plus 400. I think that Cam Rising coming back is just not, maybe now it is, but I didn't think it was being accounted for properly at 4-1. Brant Kuth coming back at tight end. I've also got a couple other guys that didn't really play at all in 2023
Yeah.
and they're older and coming back. One of the main differences, I think, in what I'm looking at versus Iowa State is that you had some good guys come in last season, but they're still young and they're still figuring it out. Cam Rising in his 27th year of college football, he's just going to be seeing the game so slow, in my opinion, that it's big return. And he was a great quarterback before he was injured. I think that Kyle Whittingham, he doesn't have much longer as the coach for Utah. The Big 12 media days are beginning this week, and he's definitely letting things out that they've already named a successor. I think he's going to try to use retirement as a rallying point for this team this year, knowing that having Cam Rising come back for one last season, this might be the last hurrah. This is a team that, yeah, I'm very high on overall. They don't lose at home. 90-26 overall, and Whittingham's 18 or 19 seasons with the team. And I make them a favorite in 11 out of 12 games this year. That Utah defense, they're always stout and sturdy. They're going to be really good this year. I think the offense is being undersold a little bit. But Iowa State, they can't close out close games. If they can finally figure that out, they could obviously at 10-1. That would be a nice little play to have going into a title game. But I think Utah as the favorite, pretty much on par with Kansas State. I'm taking Utah all day.
Who would you have favored against Utah here? I'm curious.
I think I have them as a slight dog at Oklahoma State,
At Oklahoma
actually.
State, yeah. I guess that would be the one, too. Let me give you a couple of counterpoints. Number one, I think that the Utah defense has been got by last season on reputation more. I didn't really notice this until about November, their power rating just was not on par with prior seasons. They return a lot, but I just don't know if they are like a peak Whittingham team on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know. I don't really follow recruiting that much, except for basically when USC loses another guy to Georgia. Thanks. That always happens. But I'm a little skeptical of the defense. And one other thing, I forget where I heard this. It's not my original idea, but it's stuck with me since I heard it last season. Since Andy Ludwig's been at Utah, every season he's had his quarterback lose at least one game to injury. That would concern me. So, and how Utah fits in, I don't know. The Pac-12 was so good last season, they could come in and say, you got a bunch of chumps in the Big 12. We're going to just take this easily. Or I just don't know, like what kind of, that's just a big unknown here. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. What do you think about the Big 12? Any plays here?
Yeah, just go back to that chart for a second. I think Utah is, I think, just a tad overvalued. I also think Kansas State is probably a little overvalued too. I think I kind of project this conference as just a lot more flat.
Yeah.
I don't think this is really like the way you look at it. It's Utah and Kansas State in a class by themselves, and then everybody else is basically trailing 750 for Oklahoma State, which is probably massively overvalued. The thing is, one of the things we got right/wrong last year was the Big 12 analysis. Now, we didn't like Texas. We thought, okay, Texas isn't as good as people thought. Turns out that was wrong, but also I think they just were in a really bad conference. I think overall the Big 12 was just down in that kind. Like, again, we said this yesterday, and we'll say it again. I think we're going to say this a bunch more times into the previews. Texas played three good teams. They lost against two of them. The only team they beat was Alabama, which was having a really bad month of September, right? This is the thing. I think this conference was down last year, and okay, yeah, Utah's a pretty good team. Not an amazing team, but a pretty good team, especially with Cam Rising. But outside of that, there's not a lot of really good teams here. Arizona, okay, they were pretty good, but they've just lost their head coach now.
Mm-hmm.
The only teams that really catch my eye is Kansas at 9-1. Now again, if Jalen Daniels can stay healthy, that 9-1, I think I got it. I think I bet that earlier. I think over 10-1. I can't remember the exact number I bet it at, but I did bet that one early. Okay, that's some value there. But Utah 3-1, yeah, Cam Rising was really good when he played last. Maybe he's regressed a bit. I don't know. We still don't know what exactly the injury was that kept him off the field for a full year. Like, it was his leg, and they said he's going to be fine, but then it just kept being pushed back and further back. Now, he's probably fine now.
I would like
but
to
at the
point out
same
here,
time,
sorry to interrupt you, but he actually
yes.
was at Media Day for Utah a year ago, which is just amazing. He was at Media Day
Yeah.
and he didn't even take a snap. Awesome.
Yeah, it's such a weird situation with that of like, why wasn't he on the field last year? Was he fine? Was he not fine? We'll never know. We'll maybe find in some tell-all memoir a decade from now, but we don't know what happened there. I just think the entirety of the Big 12 was just down, and I think Texas was good enough to just clean through, with the exception of Oklahoma. And Oklahoma State just scraped through and was able to just pull it out and just grind it out and get there. But none of these teams are particularly good. None of these teams fill in with any sort of confidence. I'm just looking for dogs here. I think Utah could be really good, but at the same time, I think they're beatable in a championship game, and I'm looking for someone who can take. I'm looking for a dog that can get to the championship game, and then it's whatever in the championship game itself, right? So that's why I don't hate Kansas. I don't hate an Iowa State. Arizona, iffy on the loss of the coach. UCF, yeah. I don't know. It's really iffy for me.
It is. And I just want to point out, too, we were on this. I don't know if we were frustrated or flabbergasted how Oklahoma State made the title game, and we both had them ranked well below the top two of the conference last season. They're an interesting team to look at from a metric standpoint. They had a great running game last season. They returned pretty much everything on the offensive line. They have probably the best running back in the country. And yet I need to be convinced on Alan Bowman. He had crappy metrics last season, and their defense stunk, which I think just when you've got a lot returning for the conference runner-up and the team that beat them moved on, if they're third choice, it makes for, as you said, an interesting season. There's a lot of equity basically between the top two and basically going pretty deep into, I guess it's got the deepest top tier, it seems like, of any conference. So it should be a good one to watch. All right. I had Iowa State. Jackson. Oh, I'm sorry, Jackson. Jesus. You also had Oklahoma State. My
Nothing,
bad.
nothing to be sorry about. Y'all were doing the talking for me. So yeah, I did grab Oklahoma State 16-1. Yeah, the DraftKings price of whatever plus 750, plus 800. It's not playable in my opinion, but if you could grab maybe 12-1, I think that's probably about where I make it fair. The Big 12 is up for grabs, like you guys said. I think if you could make the case for 6 or 7 different teams to win it all, to win the title, I could be convinced for pretty much any of those 6 or 7. But yeah, it's 16-1. That was a grab for me. Pretty much the entire team is coming back. Ollie Gordon, in a little bit of trouble this week with a DUI, innocent until proven guilty. But it does seem Van Gundy said some kind of questionable things at media days today. But I digress from that point. I think that he's top 2 best running backs in the Big 12. Taj Brooks for Texas Tech is up there, but I'd make them a favorite as well in 11 of 12 games. Really, what it comes down to, I'm taking a bet on Alan Bowman at 16-1. Yeah, I would not make that bet at 8-1. Fairly easy schedule. Also make them a favorite in 11 out of 12 games. Kansas State, I think their floor is a little bit lower than being a co-favorite to win the title game for the Big 12 this year. Oklahoma State at 16-1. I play it. 12-1. I still probably bet it, but don't like it nearly as much. And then at 8-1, yeah, it's not a bet for me. Didn't really want to go there with talking about value, but here we are.
Yeah, you make a good point. I could see them getting to the title game literally just on that running game and then hedging. And that's why you're a PhD level and I'm still toiling around in third grade on this stuff. All right, oops. We'll go ahead to the Sun Belt. I think you and I park our car in the same garage on this one. I'll let you go first in terms of who you like here in the Sun Belt.
Yeah, I was actually recently convinced of this on a podcast of my own by a guy named Andrew Katz. Thanks for the heads up on this one. And once I looked more into it, just made too much sense not to bet.
Yeah.
Texas State plus 550, still the best price out there, best value play, best play in general in the Sun Belt, in my opinion. Yeah, 18 returning starters, top transfer portal class in the Sun Belt. Big deal for me. $10 million in a P4 conference might not go very far, but if you have $10 million come into a G5 team, you can go a long way with that. So, yeah, top transfer portal class, 31 guys coming in. The guys that were going out seem to not be really leaving for other P4 schools or anything. So, I think that what they're bringing in is better than what's leaving. Best offensive unit in the conference, Jordan McLeod at James Madison, Sun Belt Player of the Year last year. Didn't originally seem like he was going to go to Texas State, and that ended up working out to replace TJ Finley, who I have mixed feelings on as an LSU alum, a guy that started his career there and is now playing on his 5th team this year for Western Kentucky. 4th or 5th team. Don't do any research on that one.
Yeah, LSU
Okay,
Auburn. Yeah,
yeah, so 4th team in however many years. But yeah, Texas State, super manageable schedule. I actually have them as my 2nd favorite team to make the college football playoff behind Boise State. I'm not very high on Liberty, and this Texas State team at 5 or 6-1 to win the conference. Sun Belt is the only remaining conference with divisions. Texas State is pretty much on par as co-favorites to win their division with Louisiana Lafayette. I think Texas State should be an outright favorite to win that division.
I could not agree more. First of all, when I learned that Jordan McLeod had transferred to Texas State, I felt like when a scientist that was the only one to discover a crazy virus and nobody knows all the profound implications of this. Texas State, people forget, or I don't know if they even appreciate just how bad they were before GJ Kinney in one season completely turned them around. And it was a complete roster overhaul with a bunch of guys from Incarnate Word last season. And it was why I love this so much is I'm huge on a first-time head coach having proof of concept. And if he has it in year one on his side of the ball and he's an offensive guy, how much that offense improved. And basically they showed this works in this conference in year one is just nuts. It's absolutely nuts. They took such a huge step forward. They were an absolute bear to play. People didn't want to play them last season. They were so good. And they were so bad before that. To your point, I cannot see Louisiana being anywhere near this team. Louisiana will have a nice defense. They lose Zion Chris, who basically was the barometer for that team. He landed, I think, at Houston. Michael Desormeaux might be a nice coach. I don't know if he can recover from that just in one season. Zion Chris was so good for them last season. Who actually scares me in this side of the division is, I'm going to be very specific with my words here, is Jalen Rayner. It's not Arkansas State because they're coached by Butch Jones and he can screw up anything. Jalen Rayner could basically. Here's my fear. I like that they have divisions. It really makes sense in this conference. When you're in divisions, if you just lose that one game to the wrong team, you're done. And that's my only fear with this team. I think that they're much better than every other team. I think that Jalen Rayner might be able to pull off something crazy. At least they get Arkansas State at home, which is a big help. I think the entire East is a horrible combination of overrated and stinks. Whoever wins the West is going to win the division. I think App State is vastly overrated, and we'll get into that when we get into the Sun Belt. This is my favorite conference champ to play by far. I love this, and I think plus 550 is incredible value. You and I probably differ on Boise State, but yeah, this is it's a tectonic change. Jordan McLeod going to this. It literally has playoff implications. Robert, top that.
Yes.
Tell us how wrong we are with Texas State.
No, I actually do Texas State, right? I think Jordan McLeod is actually probably an upgrade over TJ Finley. Right now, Texas State is actually plus 4 something, like plus 480 I'm seeing, or plus 450, so it's a bit less now. I definitely like the not fading app, like the fading App State thing there. I like that. Louisiana, I guess there's randomly still some Billy Napier value left over there. I'm not sure exactly why, but JMU is on one hand really sad because I was like thinking back to this. I was like, man, I can't wait to bet JMU to win the conference next year. Now they lost their head coach and I think their quarterback transferred as well.
Sorry, and
It's
their best receivers at Indiana now. They lost a lot.
Half their team went to Indiana.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happens when your coach goes somewhere, right? It's really sad. I would have loved to have bet JMU, but I can't. I can't bet that right now. Yeah, I think I do Texas State. They were actually a really surprising team last year. They didn't get to the championship game, but yeah, like when you're telling me App State is the favorite, I'm like, yeah, okay, I don't think they're the favorite.
I do want to mention too Troy and South Alabama, who were, from a metric standpoint, the top two teams in the West. Both lost their coaches as well. And TBD on the Troy guy, don't know anything about him. Major Applewhite, I think I'm sold on his capabilities. Maybe second act is better for him than the first, but he didn't really bowl me over at Houston. I think that those are two great coaches that those two top teams lost. It's just the path is just wide open there. So we're all of similar minds on that. Let's go to the Big Ten. Yikes. There's just so much here. You can just see that there's a bunch of green in the defense. This is going to be, not surprisingly, another good defensive conference. Some good offenses as well. Your best teams will be good in both. My Trojans are not among them. This is a tough one for me. I'm going to punt it to Jackson first. Sorry. You know what? Oh, shoot. Did you pass on this one?
I can touch on it real quick, but yeah, I actually haven't made a bet. I really don't see value in betting anyone in the Big Ten. I think that if you held a gun to my head and told me who to bet, I'm taking Ohio State versus Oregon versus one another. I just think the drop off between the top 3 or 4 schools in the Big Ten is massive this year. Ohio State, Oregon, they're both making pushes at national championships. I think one of them, whoever loses in the regular season to the other will be a slight dog to the other one in the title game. And I think at maybe minus 150, I could consider it. But man, when you're making bets that are 6 to 7 to 8 months in the future, it really is hard for me to get excited about anything minus odds or paying less than even money. Yeah, there's no bets from me that I would play in the Big Ten, and I just don't see any value there personally.
Agree. I guess
agree.
I've got questions about Ohio State's offense. Landing with, 1-4 in rivalry games. Need to see it there first. Oregon, their defense and I don't even know if the conventional stats bear this out because I'm so far removed from them, but I have them as like a top 3 defense in early mid-October, and by the end of the season, they were like 20th. They're not returning. They're not going to improve a lot. They return a lot of experience, but through transfers. When you see a career starts that are much more than the returning starts, typically you've got a lot of guys that came in through the portal. Maybe that works out, maybe it doesn't. Who knows how much that improves, but the guys that were on the field last year for this team are not really going to go up the learning curve that much. Not to say they're not going to be a really good team, but at 215, that's a tough apple for me to take a bite of. So I agree with you. And before I say where I landed, Robert, you go ahead first because I'm embarrassed here.
No, I actually do agree with you. I agree that Oregon and Ohio State are definitely the two favorites in prohibitive, and the only reason they're so low and neither of them is like the favorite is because they're both so competitive there, right? Because literally, and as you say, they play in the regular season. I believe Ohio State visits Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. I think so, yeah. So Oregon will probably be a slight favorite there. They'll play again in, I believe, Indianapolis. Then that's a neutral field, but in lean Ohio State there, right? And again, I think that those matchups are functionally a formality. Both of them will likely be in the college football playoff, plus the next 2 or 3 teams in the Big Ten will be there as well. This is the thing. The thing is, it's really hard to see anybody upending that paradigm at this point. The only one that I can actually really see that is USC. Um, I think Michigan is overvalued. I honestly think they lost so much. Not losing a coach of that caliber is alone a huge issue. But you're then losing basically your entire offense and also basically your entire defense and also a bunch of the coaching staff too, right? You have to replace so much and a new coach all in one season. I think that's a really tall ask. I see Michigan coming down from undefeated the last 2 seasons, or well, one loss in 2022, 0 losses in 2023. I see them coming down from that and basically coming down to that Penn State level where okay, we beat everybody else, but then we lose to the top two. But I actually see them a tad below that. I think if Penn State were to play Michigan, I think Michigan would lose to Penn State, but I think they're going to probably beat everybody above that. So that's, I think, the ceiling of Michigan. I think they could be lower than that, but I think that's their ceiling. And I think that's roughly where they are, but I still don't. I'd put Michigan even lower than that. USC, though, is an interesting one. I think people really look down on them for their 8-5 season last year. I think that's really unfair because I think part of the problem was the fact that their offense was really good with Caleb Williams. Obviously, he was the number 1 overall draft pick to the Chicago Bears. That was fine. The problem was the defense, though. And I think people are like, oh, they're bad, and they lost Caleb Williams, so they'll be bad. Guess what? Caleb Williams sat Miller Moss played in the bowl. They blew out Louisville. The idea that this offense is now all of a sudden, and to be fair, it was not just Caleb Williams that didn't play. I think some of their other picks didn't play. Some of the other potential NFL picks didn't play in that game as well. It's not, oh, Caleb Williams is gone, this offense is going to suck now. That's not how USC's offense will work now. If their defense improves, then this team is very competitive, right? And the thing is, you forget how close they were in a lot of those games that Caleb Williams basically dragged them to be competitive in those games just from his offense alone. And we're now at a point where you're just missing them. I think they're like, if there was anybody who could upset the kind of Ohio State Oregon paradigm, I think you need that offensive power, and I think that has to be USC. I think it has to be USC. I think Nebraska will make I think Nebraska might push for a playoff berth. They're putting the right pieces in place, but I still think they maybe get up to that Penn State Michigan tier. They're not going to be Oregon Ohio State tier, but they're going to be that third tier. I think maybe they get to a playoff berth, but I don't see a lot of value on them at 55-1 to win the conference.
I agree. Going back to your Michigan point, I see a lot of new bodies on the offensive line. I see a quarterback. We don't know if he can throw a forward pass. I see a lot of new faces on defense. This is not like Larry Coker taking over Miami in 2001. Not to say that Sharon Moore did not do an awesome job last season. He's undefeated. This team is very different from what he walked into last season. It's very different from walking in. It's not easy to take over a team mid-season as he did, but that team had been prepped. When it's his thing to start from the summer and spring practice, I need to see it. And 6-1 is way short. Thank you kindly, Robert. I don't feel so stupid now. USC's defense was horrible last season, and this is not a homer sentiment. I said throughout all of last season, Danton Lynn is an awesome defensive coordinator. I made lots and lots of money on UCLA on unders because Chip Kelly did just enough to basically keep the scores under, and Danton Lynn had an awesome defense that really came out of nowhere last season. Literally out of nowhere. Are they the most likely pick? No, but is there, of anybody on the top two? Definitely the only path there is, I put in really small because it's a small play, USC plus 20 plus 2200. There's a path there. I can see the narrative. The only other one I could possibly see, and then I thought, yeah, it's a freshman quarterback, was maybe Nebraska. But now you're asking like a true freshman, it ends there. That's the only other one. I think they're a pretty fat price too. Yeah, 55-1 is not the worst play in the world. It's like a Kentucky
Well,
Derby play where you just take like the crazy.
That's where you play Nebraska to make the college football playoff. That's like your perfect one where it's, oh, they win the Big Ten, great, right? It's done. Bet cash, right? That's, I think, the perfect kind of, oh, if they overperform, okay, I don't have a 55-1 ticket, but I still have a ticket where basically it's, if they make the Big Ten championship game, that ticket cashes anyways, right? That's why I do like Nebraska to make the college football playoff. I think they made a lot of steps in the last year.
That's interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, I could see that narrative getting them just in that last Power 5 spot. That's a good point.
I have 2 quick points real quick if you want me to touch on.
Please.
Now that y'all were talking, USC, do they avoid both Oregon and Ohio State in the regular season?
They do.
Not Oregon.
Yeah,
they do.
Oh, they play Oregon? They don't play Oregon?
No. They're at Michigan early too, which is nice. And they host Penn State. And they host Nebraska. It's really, the problems are, it's a typical Big Ten schedule, although they do miss those 2 top teams. The real challenges are they open with LSU and they close with Notre Dame. Just horrible bookends to a Big Ten schedule. But you could do a lot worse in the Big Ten this season.
I think my other point that I wanted to make real quick was definitely compare some of these long shots. So say you're looking at Nebraska 55-1 to win the Big Ten. Some of the to make the playoff futures prices are inconsistent with some of the conference futures. So if you can go grab Nebraska to make the playoffs at 65-1, and you're seeing them to win the Big Ten at 55-1, obviously if you win the P4 conferences this year, you're guaranteed to make a playoff berth. So just an angle to consider. Someone brought that up with me the other day, and I don't think many of my plays there's going to be value in the playoff markets, but just something to consider if you are looking at long shots.
That is a great point. Yeah, that's backwards. Just 2 separate pools clearly on those. There we go. All right. The Mountain West. You have strong feelings about this, Jackson, so I'll let you go first.
I'm very high on Boise State, my favorite team in the G5 this year. They opened at plus 200 on FanDuel in the States, and that number vanished very rapidly. I make them a favorite in 11 out of 12 games. Obviously, they're a dog at Oregon. 17 returning starters, 11 guys coming back on defense through the team last year, through the portal. Guy that I'm curious to hear your opinion on, but backup quarterback Malachi Nelson from USC last year, big-time recruit coming out of high school. He's their likely starter heading into 2024. Ashton Jonty, hands down, best G5 running back in the nation, in my opinion. Boise did set the school rushing yards record last year, over 3,000 yards. I make them a top 3 unit in every position group in the Mountain West. Fair odds to me, based on my models, I'm actually making Boise State even money to win the Mountain West. Plus 140, like I said earlier, 40 cents when it comes from plus 140 to plus 100 is a lot different than plus 3,000 going to plus 2960s. Plus 140 is still a bet for me. I'm glad to grab that at plus 200. I would take this down to even money.
Yeah, I apologize. I've got some other team's graphics up here. I'm going to go back a slide, and yeah, this is more like it here. I might have a Texas State's up there. I don't know. Who knows? So this conference is so tricky to me. Everything you say is true. I have a relationship with Boise State like I have with the Kremlin. I don't believe the official pronouncements. 2 years ago, they fired their offensive coordinator. I forget who it was, but he was horrible. They bring in Dirk Cutter, and I swear to you, I'm convinced that he was actually the head coach. And because they completely turned around, and Taylor Green went from nothing to all of a sudden a shooting star. Then last season they have a rough start. Andy Lavalos gets fired. I thought they were mathematically eliminated from taking the Mountain West. I thought that they were literally eliminated. They win it. I believe Dirk Cutter came in some kind of like analyst role after Avalos was fired. I am again convinced that he was the head coach from behind the scenes. Now he's the offensive coordinator. If he's actually the head coach, this is a slam dunk. I don't know. Plus 200 or plus 140, whatever, is not so much fun to me. You got plus 200. They're bet down quite a bit. The rest of this conference is so wide open. One of the things, when it's so indiscernible behind them, I can't see anybody challenging them, but at the same point, I don't know what to expect from this team. So, in the spirit of it being a horse racing analogy, when I see this, if this is like the 6th race at Santa Anita, and I see this is the race, okay, my pick is this is gonna be cigar time for me. I'm not gonna bet the race. I'm gonna go out and have a smoke, and I'll definitely be referring to this picture for the whole season. I can't make a play here. It's almost just I'm not gonna bet it. I'm fascinated to see if Boise is really this good. You've had 2 surprise firings in the midseason each of the last 2 seasons. What happens this time? Is Spencer Danielson really the coach? I don't know. So I'm passing. I'm going cigar time on this one. Robert, what about you?
Yeah, I agree fundamentally with this. Maybe you can make a play on UNLV or Colorado State, but Boise is so weird, right? It's like they keep looking horrible, and yet somehow they keep winning the Mountain West. And I don't understand how they do it, but they have been. And at the same time, you don't want to bet it, but like I'm not betting Boise State to do it again. I'm not betting them to do it again. I think it's fundamentally fade them or just don't bet it. I think it is, and I think I lean more towards don't bet it. Maybe you could bet. They usually don't have lines on some of these conferences mid-season, especially the non-Power Fives and Power Four. So yeah, maybe just to watch this one as just a fun kind of. I wonder what'll happen.
You make a great point, Robert, and I think I agree with both of you in this. As I talk through this, it's interesting. I absolutely can see the path that Jackson made where Boise State is the best G5 team. With the Kremlin intrigue, I don't know whether to believe it. To your point, I don't know if this is a situation where you can fade, because I don't know who you can basically pick up to fade them with. This really reminds me of one of those seasons where you had a good Oklahoma team and Texas is struggling, and it's just okay. You've got one heavy favorite in the conference now. Can they be beaten? And that's the narrative of this conference, and it's going to be interesting to watch, especially since they're my cigar hour. So let me try to move over here, and we will move on to the SEC. I will go first with a very unfashionable pick. I'm sure Robert's going to disagree with this. I don't see a lot of value in Georgia at plus 200. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody that's smarter than me, like Jackson, sees value in that. Sark at plus 320. Good luck to you. Alabama loses the best coach of all time. They pick up an excellent coach. It's not like Kalen DeBoer is going into an empty roster. Jalen Milroe is very adept with a deep ball, just like the former quarterback at Washington. He's a much better athlete, I think, than Michael Penix. He clearly struggles with the short stuff a lot more than Penix does, but we'll just get past that at plus 800. I'm actually going to go with the Crimson Tide at plus 800. I think this is a little bit below the radar since everybody's, I think, just blowing off Alabama without Saban. Is that a fair characterization?
I think maybe a little bit, but I think also, too, just the SEC is a gauntlet. And Kalen DeBoer, he got a little lucky last year. Washington played in a lot of close games, some decisions that in real time I definitely questioned. I don't hate Alabama, but I definitely think Missouri in the 1400 plus 1400 to plus 1800 range, depending on where you can get it, they're worth a look because Texas and Georgia, they're going to play some tough teams. Can they ultimately end up seeing each other in the title game? I wouldn't be surprised one bit. But let's stay on the trend of looking for teams with easy schedules, lots of returning production on the offensive side, and Mizzou is that one for me. They have the easiest schedule in the SEC. They face 6 teams this year with a first-year head coach across the board. They don't have to play Georgia, don't have to play Texas, Ole Miss, or LSU. Their toughest game actually will come down at Alabama in late October. I think the winner of that game could easily make it in. I definitely could see either of those teams slipping into the title game and being a dog in the game. But yeah, Luther Burden, absolute stud at receiver. He could have gone pro this year. I think that they have the best wide receiver room in the SEC, debatably in the country, but definitely top 5. I just don't understand why the books are pricing this team like a fringe top 25 SEC team to win this conference whenever pretty much everywhere. Take media writers and people who are making these votes, take what they say with a grain of salt, but I think 14-1 is worth a sprinkle in my opinion, just based on the ease of the schedule.
Yeah, now I'm curious, you as an LSU guy, LSU took their defensive coordinator. I'm surprised their defensive power rating is actually 2.9. I thought it would have been a 0 or negative. Their defense was very generous last season. So I guess, are you happy as an LSU fan getting their DC? And then if that's the case, do you think that's a drawback and that's why maybe there's not as much love for Mizzou as you would expect? You make a really good point here, especially with that schedule.
Yeah, obviously the defense is going to be the weaker of the 2 units this season. I think if Missouri can outscore a lot of these teams, they can put up 50 a game, then they're going to be competitive in all of these games. Yeah, I like it as an LSU fan. When it comes to betting on my biases, LSU usually gets left out. Last year, they were nice to make a lot of money betting their overs. Similar to USC, we will be facing against your team this year, so hoping for a lot of points, but I'll save that for another day. But yeah, I think this is just one of those teams that they're going to have to get it done through the air. The schedule is just so simple. You're hosting Vanderbilt. At Texas A&M could be tough, but I'm a little bit more bearish on Texas A&M than most people this year. Hosting Auburn, Oklahoma in that same range, but getting them at home. Obviously, I'm going to make Missouri a favorite. And then South Carolina, Mississippi State, Arkansas are teams that I think virtually have no chance of winning the SEC this year. 14-1, somewhere in that range is what I would play Mizzou at. I don't think I would go below 12-1, but I think that's a team that could end up sneaking into the title game alongside Alabama. One of those 2 teams could easily make it in.
You make a great point there, and I might just play both those just to surround it and just as a Georgia fade. Robert, what do you think?
Yeah, the thing is, it's a really good point about Mizzou, right? And this is a team that you're like they can never get into the conference championship game because they have to. They're in the same division as Georgia, right? But guess what? That doesn't matter anymore. I guess they don't have to play Georgia anymore, right? This is the same point as this now open the way this with the division list is set up. You now have the ability for a team like Missouri or Tennessee, right? Teams that would be usually shut out of a title game by losing to, say, a Georgia or something. They now have a shot at it if the other division or quote unquote division isn't as strong, right? Missouri is an interesting team this year. Tennessee is an interesting team that I like too. Again, I'm not sure necessarily if I like these to win CC, but college football playoff for some of these teams, especially Mizzou, especially Tennessee. Tennessee is fascinating. We obviously everybody in college football is Iowa has the best possible defense, one of the best defenses in the entire game. Sometimes number 1, definitely a top 5 defense, right? And then they play the bowl game against Tennessee, and then Tennessee's quarterback goes away. I think he declared for the draft. And then in comes the new starting quarterback, Nicole Lemavia, something like that. I can't remember the exact last name. It's a hard last name to pronounce.
You barely missed it. Yeah, you almost got it.
Almost. Okay. I'm sure I'll get it this year because I have a Heisman future on him too because this is the point, right? It's like he tore up that Iowa defense. I think people are completely discounting that. They're like, oh, that means nothing. It's like, oh, he torched Iowa. One of the best defenses in the country. He destroyed them. And that means, in my opinion, that means a lot. And when you're looking at it, Mizzou has an easy schedule, yes, and Georgia is probably going to chew up a lot of these teams. They play Texas. I think they play Ole Miss as well. I think they play LSU. So Georgia will hand some of these teams losses. If you're, say, Missouri or Tennessee, and you can scrape by with only 1 or 2 losses, like only 1 loss, basically, yeah, you got a shot in here. But also, especially for Tennessee or Missouri, the lower of those 2 pairs, if you end up with a better record than, say, a Texas or an Ole Miss or an Alabama, you got a pretty good shot at getting into the playoff, too. And this is, obviously, we're talking specifically to win the conference, but I don't mind a shot on Tennessee or Missouri to make the playoff.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really given a lot of thought to that bet before y'all mentioned it, but I'm going to take a closer look at that pool for sure. All right, the Mac. Just going to go first on this one. To me, I just, again, to the horse racing analogy, this seems to me like a lower level sprint, 3/4 of a mile, and there's just one horse that has early speed and get out to a 4-length lead at the first call, and that's Miami, who is, I think, pretty clearly the only team that can throw the ball this season. And I'm really not going to overthink it beyond that. I do want to point out something that's just going to make the Mac preview so special. You've got some really shaky quarterback play here. Apex of 100 is average. You've got some really bad numbers in here. I cannot wait to see how bad is Central Michigan's pass defense when they they played in this horrible conference and they gave up an apex of 131 and Kent State 143. There's going to be an early season game where there's going to be a number not big enough in those two, and I'll get into it when we do the MAC preview. But to have that bad of a pass defense when it's almost numerically impossible in this conference is just amazing. Again, I'm not going to overthink it. One team can pass the ball, and that's enough for me in this conference. I got burned by that a couple of years ago when Gabbert got hurt, and I think this, as much as anything, is a bet on Gabbert's health. Not a great price, but I'm happy taking the only team that can pass the ball at plus 220. And I think nope, you didn't have, I think you were along the same lines as me, Jackson, but didn't really have a play here.
Yeah, the MAC is, I think, maybe the only conference I haven't bought any futures tickets in. But Miami, I think, as you said, they're the clear favorite. I'd probably play them around plus 350. I'm not sure on the exact number, but I want to say the MAC favorite heading into the season hasn't won the title in like the past 10 years, possibly, maybe longer.
That seems,
obviously, don't make bets for future results based on that. But I think this might be the year where that streak is broken. Toledo, they're losing a whole lot on the offense. I could maybe see someone making the case for Bowling Green, but if we're sticking with the trend of betting on 5th or 6th year quarterbacks, I think that you have to stick with Miami.
I want to meet the person that's making a case for Bowling Green. That's a fascinating person. To your point, Toledo just cleaned out on the offensive line, literally just starting from scratch there. I think DeQuan Finn, to your point, bailed them out of a lot of games with a decent passing game and very nice mobility. I don't know. I doubt them every season, and sometimes they just shove it in my face, but I'm happy to fade them. Robert, any opinions on the MAC?
Yeah, this is. I have a habit of getting burned on the MAC, specifically the MAC championship game. I think I'm like 0-3 the last 3 seasons in Max. Again, I have a good record in college football, just not MAC championship games. I should just not bet on the MAC championship game. But no, yeah, I don't touch the MAC. Fun games to watch, and fun games to watch in the season, but just not the championship game for me. I'm gonna stay away from that.
Yeah, and just to repeat myself, I cannot wait to dig into Central Michigan's and Kent State's schedule. They're gonna, both of them are gonna lose a game by 50. It's just a question of which one. Oh, near and dear to our heart, Conference USA. God bless you all. Not a lot of value in this one, I don't think. Clearly, Liberty is just by far the class of this conference. They're getting transfers from Power 5 programs, not starters, obviously, but guys that are good enough to get an offer at Power 5 conferences. And the rest of the conference is getting guys from FCS and upwards transfers. It's just they're getting guys from a different planet here. Liberty, you're leaving 175. To skip ahead again, this is another cigar race where I'm just going to light up a smoke and not bet on it. Although, going back to the horse racing analogy, laying 175 is basically about 1 to 2 odds. And if this is a horse race, I would probably take Liberty if I'm getting 1 to 2. So, not to your point, not the most fun use of locking up funds for 5 or 6 months. But there are much worse bets than that, although it's not the most fun. And I think you had a slightly different angle on this one as it relates to Conference USA.
Yeah, I think if you're willing to play money on Liberty, yeah, like you said, minus 175, it's implying roughly a 63% chance. I think I would need closer to 50-50 to make a bet on Liberty. Not to say that their schedule isn't just an absolute joke. One of the things that I think could eventually keep them out of the college football playoff, I think that they'll end up losing to Appalachian State. Obviously, that's not going to be within the conference. I think that I think that they will lose that game,
Wow.
actually, yeah. I come back to this in a couple months, but I just don't think Liberty's that good. I think last year in the New Mexico State title game that Diego Pavia exposed them, and just they don't play anyone. So you really don't, you can't get a good feel for how good this team actually is relative to other teams that are going to be at the top of some G5 conferences. So I do think, though, that they will go undefeated in the regular season in conference play. I think they win all 8 games. Just, I don't see anyone beating them just looking at the schedule. It's absolutely abysmal. I don't believe they play a P5 team all season, P4 rather. There's not really any concerns about looking ahead to other teams or bigger matchups, things that nature. So, yeah, I did end up playing the over 7.5 conference wins on DraftKings at plus 220, but I'm not playing Liberty to win the conference. Just if Salter goes down, who's their quarterback, I think that this conference is bad and definitely the worst conference in college football this year, but Liberty, they have a cakewalk. If I'm going to play anyone, maybe Western Kentucky or Jacksonville State. If someone knows more about those teams than me, please let me know, like your angle, because I'll gladly listen to it.
Yeah, I agree. Not the best conference, but I love this conference. It's weird. It's just, I don't know. Just we can go on for hours and hours about just. It's such a fun conference. So, Robert, can you see any angle here at all?
Yeah, I do the over 7.5 conference wins. That is nice. I like that.
That's a good find. Yeah.
I'm not New Mexico State, and to be fair, they're not on this board, and they should not be on this board at all, anywhere near those who win the conference board. Is Jacksonville State eligible to win the Conference USA? Because they were an FCS team last 2 years ago, right? Are they? Wouldn't they be the? Wouldn't that be the
This is their.
JMU thing?
I think it opens it up for this
That's
to be their first year.
okay.
I
Because
guess.
JMU was in jail for 2 years, right?
Yeah, unless they change that ruling.
I
Wouldn't
can't
it be
imagine
funny
NCAA would
if
ever change a rule on the fly like that.
the
There's no way.
the plus 425 is like the odds of them to win the conference and the odds of them to overturn the ban on appeal. There's
Yeah,
it's a part of the legal
exactly.
bet too. But no, I just wanna leave this alone. At minus 175, you can just bet Liberty throughout. Maybe not necessarily rolling over
That's
money
true.
lines, but you can bet over spreads, and you can get better values than that. If Liberty really is that good, you can get a spread in championship game minus 110, right? Or somewhere in there, there'll be spreads that would be more than sufficient enough to adjust that for that risk. I'm not touching that. I think maybe you can look at potentially against Liberty in the conference championship game, maybe bet a spread against them. But outside of that, I don't see anything. The other thing is that they're going to be helped a lot because they were the best G5 team. This is the same thing why Tulane was so highly ranked last year in
Right.
all the committee rankings. They're going to get that boost because they were good last year, right? And we see the same thing again and again, and they just always overrank the team that was the best last year. So, although we think Liberty's going to be good, and to be fair, they probably are going to be pretty good, there's a chance that they're not, and in that case, then I think it's better to have the ability to fade them, and I think you just bet them as you go rather than just straight up.
Yeah, this seems like a more extreme version of the Mountain West, where you've got just one front runner, and the intrigue is, can anybody even trip them up? All right, so that will bring us to season win totals. Couple of quick questions about just concepts for season win totals. For identifying plays, it sounds, are you running a model and just coming to like an expected number of wins, Jackson? Is that basically what you're doing? Or just briefly, what's your process on getting to season win totals?
So my models that I'm usually making are specifically towards futures. So win totals, I'm still refining that process. I keep it super simple actually. Looking at schedules, writing down on a notepad wins and losses projected based on look ahead lines, things of that nature, coming to those conclusions. And then the way I look at win totals is it's essentially a very large round robin. The only problem is you don't know the true prices on these games beforehand. But if we know that
Yeah.
a team is going to be a favorite in 12 games and the books are making them a 9.5 point, I apologize, giving them a 9.5 win total, then something's got to give. Also, another big thing, just shopping lines. If you see a place that has a team with over 9.5 wins at plus 110, another place has them at minus 130, maybe there's value there. So definitely look at those numbers. So for me, it's more of a top-down approach, not as much originating going on and figuring out the true win totals, but you can look at a lot of these schedules and get a pretty good feel.
It's tough to go through every schedule. That's the other thing
Mm-hmm.
too, is just there's 134 teams, and I just look at the outliers, just who's got a really bad quarterback or who's got an underrated, overlooked quarterback. Those kind of just outliers where I think the market might. My metrics are not the only thing that drives college football, but what do my metrics see that basically maybe the market doesn't in terms of just real outliers? One other just concept, I'm curious if you've ever come across this. I just stumbled across this when I think we were going over the MAC last season, is I want to avoid traffic jams within a conference or a division. And by that, if there's a really bloated lower middle class, I want to stay away from that because there's a lot of coin flips that basically leave it up to luck as much as anything. I want a lot of definition. And if you've got somebody that they're going to have 5 or 6 coin flips in a season, I'm just moving on. I'm just curious if you've kind of gone by that concept as well.
I think for the most part, I'm looking at it as if like I'm buying stock in a team and which teams am I bearish on. And when I play the stock market, I don't really like to short stocks. I'm not a huge shorting teams guy either. So betting unders for me has been something I've tried. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense, but I'm definitely heavier on the overs. So if you want to consider that square this year, I mostly am like finding teams that I identify as like a team that I think is going to be better than expected this year and looking further into that team as much as I possibly can and usually arriving at the conclusion that I think they're going to win more games than being posted. I would like to add more unders to my portfolio because you tell everybody you've got 10 win totals and none of them are overs. Doesn't sound too great, but the teams that I'm bullish on this year, I'm very bullish on. And I usually size my win total bets whenever I am betting an over. If you look at my portfolio, most of the teams I have to win their conference, I have their win totals as well. So I like to bet it to where they're about on par. So if I have, let's just say, $100 on NC State to win the ACC, I would put $100 on them to hit their win total as well. I really don't play minus odds futures really at all. So for win totals, if it's below plus 100, I'm generally going to stay away unless it's just something I can't turn down.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I would just push back on one thing. Generically, if somebody says 9 of my 10 bets are overs, I might think square.
Mm-hmm.
If they say, yeah, one of those is Texas State, okay, now you got my attention, and so on that. So I think it depends on where the overs are as much as anything. So I can be with you on that. Some specific plays. So we covered this when we were going over the conference championships. These are just some of the overplays / ideas that we had that we covered to Jackson's point in the first segment, talking about the conference champs, UAB over 6.5, Iowa State over 7.5. That seems really generous. SMU I like. Virginia Tech, not as much as SMU, but they get a pretty nice schedule. We've shown a lot of love for Texas State. And although you didn't have them as a season win total play, did you?
No, I think since I was a little late to the bus on betting their conference futures, okay. I just, once the value dries up on a bet, and if I see movement against the direction that I want to go, that it's a lot harder to put money down on not the best price. So it's definitely still in consideration for a bet for me to make, but I have to look more into the numbers across the books.
Well, I'm a dope when it comes to this, so I have no problem just taking less value because I still think I'm smarter than some of the squares out there. And then back to your NC State love of over 8.5, that awesome schedule. So just a recap of what we like in segment 1 that just we like here in the season win totals as well. I will start Notre Dame over 10. This does not seem like at first blush a great bet. When you're betting over 10, it means you only have one game to lose. I think this schedule is sneaky super easy. Notre Dame usually plays a tougher schedule than this. I'm probably a little more bearish on Florida State than the average fan. I think at Texas A&M might be tricky in a typical season. First year of Elko, I think that's the time you want to get them. I like / love the changes with the huge upgrade at OC, getting Denbrock. Sorry about that, Jackson. I know that's going to hurt. Riley Leonard, I think, is a great addition. Sneaky big transfer. Chris Mitchell in from FIU. I had him 20th in Ryan last season. The defense made a big step forward under Freeman in his second year as a head coach. Only 3 true road games. At Georgia Tech is at the, whatever that place is called. What is that? The Mercedes? Is that the Peach? What is that thing called in Atlanta?
Mercedes-Benz Superdome.
Okay.
The Superdome's in New Orleans, but it's definitely, I want to say it's also a Mercedes like venue. Don't hold me to that, but
so if it's in Atlanta, I think that's going to be probably a split crowd. I could just see that. If it's in Atlanta, it's not on campus at Georgia Tech. Their Navy and Army, I think one of those is at the Meadowlands and one is at Yankee Stadium. they've got a very forgiving schedule here. They're off the week before Florida State as well. I see them as almost somewhat easily a playoff team this season. Call me a sucker because it's an over on a very public team, but I like this one. Any pushback from you guys?
I like
No,
it. I
it's
think that, like you said, I think Notre Dame is pretty much a shoe-in for the college football playoff. We've got to remember that there's a selection committee going in to picking these teams. It's not strictly numbers based or
Yeah,
who's eliminated from divisions or conferences. And in terms of college football, trying to make as much money as they can, it would just be dumb to leave a competitive Notre Dame team out. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. You're getting at Texas A&M in week one versus a new head coach in his first game with the team. Florida State, a little bit more bearish on them. Besides that, the schedule shapes up for 10 wins. Like you said about having the 10, if they lose one, then that's really all you got. But you still push with the 10, and I think
that's
it's
the
just,
thing.
yeah, it's very unlikely that this team is going under 10. Yeah, I think this team makes the playoffs, and I'll talk more about them later.
Okay, cool. Robert.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a 10-2 Notre Dame, I think makes the playoffs. If you just say lose Florida State, lose USC, they're in the playoffs and they could win those games, right? I think that slots in perfectly as like a 10th seed somewhere ahead of Big 12 or ACC number 2, right? I think there's a very clear path to the playoff. I think they're a better team than last year's record suggested, but they did have a tough schedule last year. So I think I'm a bit on this Notre Dame team. I'm starting to come around to the idea that they're going to be a really good team this year, and not particularly tested. Right? We expect Florida State to be down from last year. We expect USC to be up a bit, but there's a real chance there's like an 11-1 Notre Dame that's like the 5th or 6th seed or something there, right? I'm interested to see what this team can do this year. I think they could be in a really good position this year.
Yeah. All right, so we all agree on that. I think that we all agree on this next one too. When we did our season premiere last night, a lot of nice pieces falling into place here. Signetti, great coach, huge upgrades at the head coach and coordinator positions, immense upgrade at quarterback. Curtis Rourke had nice numbers at Ohio, and Brandon Sorsby did not have nice numbers. Bringing an all-conference receiver Elijah Sarrett from JMU. 4 defensive starters from the JMU defense too. And what's interesting, one guy from Old Dominion also, who Signetti played against every season as well, as that was in his division. They only have 4 road games this season, and I actually think that they'll be favored in at least 2. I think by the time the line closes, they should be favorites at UCLA. Northwestern, who knows by then? I think they're favorites at Michigan State. 5 seems very nice. If you just take the luck regression from last year and basically give them 1.5 more wins, that just gets you to 4 or 5 already without all the other upgrades. I like this. I think you like this as well too, right, Jackson?
This is probably one of my favorite win totals for this year. Kurt Signetti, the guy's a winner, proven commodity. His dad is in the College Football Hall of Fame. Ever since he was, I think, 13 years old, he said he wanted to be a college coach, and everywhere he's gone, he's proven that he is definitely capable. He did bring over 23 total players and staff from James Madison last year. Would have loved for Jordan McLeod to come over with him, but
Yeah.
Curtis Rourke will have to do. But if you just look at this schedule, I could realistically see them just winning their first 6 games. I played the over
I'm not crazy, right?
Yeah, not at all. I played the over 5.5 actually at close to plus 128. I want to say the over 5 at minus 130 is fine. I think that that's more than a fair play, and yeah, you do get that push potential. But Indiana, I can't remember in my lifetime them winning or making a bowl game. Not to say that they haven't, but I think that's going to ultimately be the line that Kurt Signetti tries to set. I think get to 6 wins, we can go bowling. Schedule starts off fairly easy. Maybe they have some trouble with the meat of their conference schedule, but I think they easily could already have the 6 wins or 5 wins locked up by the time they're playing Purdue to end the season. So I'm loving this team. Obviously, not ever a contender in the Big Ten this season, but I think that they'll go to surprise a lot of people.
Yeah. Robert?
Yeah, I think this year there's going to be like a redistribution of the wins in the Big Ten. Like you've been used to Maryland racking up wins, Michigan racking up the wins, Minnesota, Illinois to some extent. I think you're now going to get to a point when those teams are like other teams have come in now, and other teams have gotten better to the point where I think some of those are going to get pushed down. Specifically Maryland, but other teams as well, right? And I noticed Maryland on the schedule, even Washington to some extent, they're going to get squeezed a bit. I think that a team like Indiana, a team like Michigan State, again, we're not betting on Indiana to win it or go to the college football playoff here, but I think we're definitely betting on over a bowl game, and I think that's definitely a plausible path here.
Yeah. This is officially a sharp play. Okay. Good spot for Indiana to really go over that 5 wins, I think, is against Washington. Washington just gets cleaned out. Look at this. Just cleaned out the offensive line. They lose a lot off a pretty questionable defense last season. To your point earlier, Jackson, about they were a lucky team. If you just take the four-win luck regression back from last year's team, you're all the way to 8. Not to mention losing Michael Penix and basically anybody that could catch a ball and run and all that stuff. Cleaned out, entirely new staff. Jed Fish has had a slow build at Arizona. It was fun to watch. That first season in Arizona was really something to behold, and not in a great way. I don't know how Will Rogers fits in. If you're an LSU guy, you probably saw how great he was in the Leach offense, and then when he was not in the Leach offense, it was very different. That the only experience on their defense is in a very leaky pass defense. I have them as dogs in probably 7 games this season, which, not that I'm the best originator in the world, but I'm pretty freaking good. And that's enough margin of me just to take this as an underplay. Jackson?
You know what? This might be one I have to add to my arsenal now that I'm looking at the schedule a little bit further into it. I mean, it's honestly the schedule looks like Indiana's a little bit. I think that they could probably win their first 5 or 6 games, and then the rest of them are pretty tough. So,
whoa! Against Rutgers has a mean defense, man.
like I'm saying, now that you mentioned that, I guess they do have Bill O'Brien coming in. So, let's go to the first 4 games. Having
Fair.
said that, maybe the angle could be see if a market opens up for a midseason win total. If they go 4-0 in their first 4, maybe look to bet the under from there. I think that could be a realistic play if you're in a state that has access to a lot of sports books and lots of different markets. I still think they'll probably beat Rutgers, honestly, but I digress from that point. The conference schedule outside of that is impossible. If they lost...
After that, they're basically out of runway. All they get is UCLA. It's tough after that.
If they lost 6 of those 7 games, then yeah, I would not be surprised one bit. And then, like you said, returning players. Lots of guys left to follow Kalen DeBoer. Lots of guys got a little bit more exposure by playing in the national title game than they probably should have. Got looks in the NFL. Michael Penix is gone. Jabbar Muhammad, he left for Oregon, one of their best defensive backs. So yeah, I think under 6.5. If I could find an under 7, I'd probably obviously prefer that at maybe minus 150 is as far as I would go, but 6.5 I definitely think is fair.
All right, Robert, you going to break this tie?
Yeah, I like the under here too. I think it'll probably take it was a slower build with Jed Fish. I think there's also just the scale of losses. I think he took a while to build up his Arizona team to what he wanted it to be. I think it's similar. Obviously not the same. There's still pieces, but I think that the decimation of that Washington team is a similar level of decimation. They got Will Rogers, that's cool, but I just don't see the pieces there, especially right yet. Especially and if this was in the Pac-12, I'd be like, yeah, sure, 8-win season, but we're not in the Pac-12 anymore. We're in the Big Ten, and you've got Oregon, you've got Penn State, you've got USC, you've got Indiana, Rutgers. There's a lot of good teams here, and then probably 1 or 2 teams that's going to surprise you. Also, Washington State in the revenge game. Yeah, good luck with that one. Even Northwestern, nothing to sneeze at there. So there's some issues here. Even Iowa as well, right? If Will Rogers doesn't massively overperform, you're going to be in deep trouble in some of those games. So I like the under 6.5.
Alrighty, so it's maybe a pod play, but not a sharp play if Jackson's not in. We'll just leave it at that.
I still lose about 50% of my bets, so don't forget that.
Okay. Yes, you don't know how many times I refer to that in horse racing. It's just okay. Yeah, this is one of the 70% the guy loses. All right, you've got an interesting play here on Air Force. I probably agree with your logic, although I don't have the stones to do it. So walk us through it here.
I think I can see why you don't have the stones to do it based on what you said earlier on not wanting to bet on teams with lots of coin flips, but Air Force, like they're the Clemson of the Midwest. They had no transfers on the service academies, and they don't bring transfers into play. And this team is losing everyone. Yeah,
Yep.
Quarterback's gone. Entire offensive line is gone. They do have a couple easy wins, like versus Merrimack. I think that versus San Jose State, probably a coin flip. Some of the other games, yeah, they just have a lot of coin flips that I don't think they'll. Maybe they'll get a little bit of a bump because they're Air Force and people want to be patriotic and root for America's teams, but I just don't see it. I like the 6.5 as well because one of the motivating factors for playing for a service academy is winning a bowl game. You can still get to a bowl game with the 6 wins, and obviously this is only for the regular season. I'm sure they'll be able to find some motivation in doing that. But yeah, 6.5. I think this should be probably closer to 5.5 or even 6.
Very fair. And the reason I don't have the stones to go against him, you make a great point on the traffic jam. Very much that's in play too. The option teams, the military option teams are just they can just have success out of nowhere. That's the thing. It's witchcraft. It's like betting golf. It's just you never know from year to year where some UFO is going to come out in a good or bad way. Although they found a way to really have some stupid losses the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. It's just a high variance team. Last year, I actually liked them to win the conference, and they just fell apart. Mm-hmm. Granted, it was due to some injuries and some regression as well, but this is just one of those teams that I think there's just so many coin flips, and I think ultimately the coin's going to flip against them a little bit more than it's going to flip for them.
Fair. Yeah. Robert, any opinion on the Falcons here?
Yeah, the thing about Air Force was last year I was on them to win the Mountain West, and they did not do that. And the reason they didn't do that was like hilarious, complete collapse in the back half of the year, just losing games they should not have lost at all. And you're taking that team, and then you're making them worse. Okay, that's not. I'm not like, oh man, can't wait to bet on that team. No, I take the under 6.5 here. I think that's a pretty fair play. It's just they lost games in shocking fashion. Teams they should have beaten by teams they were 20-point favorites on, just losing outright against them. It was insanity. I don't even know what happened at the end of that season. And now you're taking away their better players, and you're like, good luck. No, that's not happening.
Agree. All right, I've got the exact. I guess it's the bizarro version of Texas State. And that is Kennesaw State, the Owls. I love this place so much, and I love this conference, and it's going to be a blast. Not only were they an FCS team last season, they were a bad FCS team last season. 3-6 last season. 8-12 their last 2 seasons as an FCS team. They were a 17.5-point dog to Sam Houston. Say it out loud. That's unbelievable. Their starting quarterback last season, 2 for 11 for 18 yards. Good for him. I don't have him favored in a single game this season. Tennessee Martin won their division or their conference last season. Guess who went 3-6? The Kennesaw Owls. Before last season, I was scared for Sam Houston about how ill-prepared they were to play in FBS. Look at how last year's Sam Houston compares to this. That should be 24. Pardon me, Kennesaw State. Sam Houston is way, way, way ahead of the grade as compared to this Kennesaw State Owls team. Not only do I think they don't win 3, I don't know if they win more than 1. 1 could be a big stretch here. I love this play. It's got all the things. It's got under. It's got Conference USA. It's got a poorly prepared team. It's got a bad quarterback. Give me this. This is Cuse action in October. Tell me I am right, Jackson.
You're definitely right. Like I said, it's hard to root against these newer teams coming in, and I honestly haven't done a ton of research into Kennesaw State because why would I? I think another way to look at that is maybe even looking for some like alt win totals. You can find like under 1.5, even like under 1. If you can get plus 200 or plus 250 on something along those lines, that might be the easiest hedge opportunity of all time at Louisiana Tech to end the season. But yeah, I definitely agree. If this team won 0 games, it'd be really depressing and really sad because every team, every senior deserves to win at least 1 football game in their last year. And looking at the schedule, man, I don't really know if I see it.
Make me feel bad about this. No, I'm happy about this bet. This is CUSA. This is CUSA in a nutshell. Robert, you got to be joining me on this. You have to.
Yeah, the thing was, we saw Sam Houston State do some really rough things last year. Now, they finally figured out how to play football in the last 3 games of the season, so that's great. Good for them. We mentioned the 17.5-point dog at Sam Houston State. Sam Houston didn't even cover that spread, by the way, to be fair. They actually almost lost that game as well. That's how bad Sam Houston was. And we're now like, oh, okay, I think this is whole degrees worse. Like they're playing Tennessee Martin, okay, but a relatively good FCS team. You have a Conference USA team scheduled. Some of those teams were like not bad at all. Then you play some random Mountain West teams and Louisiana Tech. Not great. I think Sam Houston State finally figured out some stuff towards the end of last year, especially in those last couple of games. I don't see them. But again, I think Sam Houston State had what, 1 or 2 wins? I think 2 wins, right?
I think they went
2 win
3 and
season,
9
right?
actually.
They had wins, really?
Yeah, surprisingly. Going back to the traffic jam analogy, I think these guys are below the traffic jam. I think they're a safe dog in every conference game by at least a touchdown. This is why I love Conference USA. All right, that's the end of my vanity project here. UTEP. I did not expect this until I was prepping for the Conference USA preview. Their head coach, Scotty Walden, I don't know if you remember this. You probably do, Jackson. You remember in the COVID year when Southern Miss just absolutely crapped the bed in their opener and they fired their coach in week 1 before
Ooh,
most of
yeah. Actually, wasn't Frank Gore Jr. was like just coming up at that
Yep.
point, I think.
Also, I think he's quarterbacking part-time for that team.
Oh, yeah.
So Scotty Walden was the coach that stayed there for about 3 games and said, this is stupid. I'm going to Austin Peay instead. And now he makes a full circle back to UTEP, Conference USA against a former Conference USA team, or from Conference USA team in Southern Miss. Need to rebuild on the offensive line. That's a problem. A lot of transfers from Austin Peay. And they had a pretty good offense last season. I think Cade McConnell is probably safely in that second tier of Conference USA quarterbacks, and I think that's going to be a lot in this conference. I broke down his apex as a starter against the 2 good defenses. His apex was a 65. Understandable, not good, but I can forgive that. Against these other 4 teams, 161. And he threw the ball a lot. This is not like a Cade McNamara who's throwing the ball 12 times a game. Their 5 most winnable games are at home. I see a very junior, less interesting, less good version of Texas State possibly here. This is an exciting thing. I have irrational love for Conference USA. Now, Jackson, tell me I'm done and this is way below your grade and you can't be bothered with this.
I don't want to say that, but that's what I'm thinking. So, yeah, UTEP, it's just I don't have enough information. I haven't broken down the roster far enough. I obviously like your angle. If you're looking into it, there's got to be something there. But it's just I don't have enough information at this time to make a bet.
Very fair. Robert, my fellow CUSA truther.
I actually like UTEP. They were obviously things didn't go well for them last year, but they were competitive in a lot of games, and they're less experienced this year, but they do have a pretty half decent head coach. I think he this team could do stuff again, like going to a bowl, getting 5 wins, 6 wins. I think that's definitely plausible. This team was competitive in a lot of games last year. Don't know why they're playing Tennessee. That's weird, but yeah, that. I don't think this team is that bad. I think this team is actually not a half decent team.
And I think their quarterback is somewhat. There's a lot of bad quarterbacking in this conference. I think they puts them ahead of the traffic jam, if not at the very top of it. All right, Auburn under 7.5. I'm curious where you land on this, Jackson, since you've got SEC pedigree. I think they're at such a huge disadvantage from a quarterback position. I think that's really the only thing. That's where the starts and ends for me. The average quarterback apex in the rest of the SEC is 126, and it's not like Thorne has a lot of upside. Only Mertz has more career starts in the SEC, so I think you are seeing what you're going to get. Maybe a second season under Freeze moves him up. Not a good sign when after 1 season you're replacing both coordinators. Kent State did that. If you do that at Auburn after 1 season, that's not great. Only 4 defenses worse in the conference last season. I have them as based on last year's power ratings, they are only better than 5 of this season's 12 opponents. I don't think they make really steps forward. They bring in a lot of receiving in the transfer portal, but I don't like this schedule either. Once we get the conference play, I'm probably more bullish on Arkansas than you are, but you don't really have a lot of breathers here, especially getting Texas A&M late rather than early. You're probably going to say not a lot of value here is my guess, but curious what you think as a SEC guy.
I definitely lean the under, but it's a no bet for me. Peyton Thorne, he does not pass my eye test, and
Yeah.
I think they got exposed a little bit last year on a game I'm fairly sure both of you guys were high on was versus New Mexico State. And
Oh, yeah.
this is the type of team that They're still the little brother in the state of Alabama. They're the inferior Tigers in the SEC to both Mizzou and LSU at this point. And it's just not a team that I'm very high on because I think it's a kind of team that can just give up. They close out the season versus Texas A&M and at Alabama. They'll probably get a couple easy wins versus Vandy and ULM, but at Kentucky, at Missouri, at Georgia, they could very easily lose all three of those. Oklahoma, that's going to be a tough game as well. I make those teams pretty much on par, but Oklahoma slightly better. Yeah, this is just not a team that I definitely lean the under, but not a team that I want to put any money on because the SEC, I have a clear bias. It's a little bit harder for me to play win totals whenever I have to incorporate the LSU factor in there. I like the under, but it's a no bet for me at the moment.
Before I give it to Robert, let me just make this case. If you're really averse to unders, this is a great starter kit for you. You get a horrible quarterback against just a vicious defensive conference. Small bet just to whet the appetite, just a little taste, and you'll be hooked. So, Robert, what do you think
I could be
about Auburn
convinced.
Yeah, I'm not convinced they hired the right coach for this job. I think they hired it because it was someone who beat Nick Saban a couple times, and Nick Saban's gone now. Okay,
No,
but that's the point, right? You're like, we need to beat Nick Saban. Nick Saban's all right, cool, I'm gone. And they're like, but we hired this guy to beat you. I'm retired now. Have fun. That's the problem, right? It was a reaction to Nick Saban, and they should have been thinking, hey, what happens? Who's coming up after Nick Saban? Because Nick Saban is getting older. It's been clear he's been getting older and potentially looking at retirement at some point. I didn't think this year, but 3-4 years down the road, it would probably have made more sense to hire a coach for that term rather than immediately, okay, this guy can beat Nick Saban, even though he was never going to do that in the first year. I think this team is not particularly good, and now we're getting to the point where the SEC is getting tougher. You don't play those tougher teams per se, but you are exposed to Georgia this year and Missouri. Those are the two basically best teams in the East. You normally wouldn't have to play them. And you have Kentucky, though you have to go to all of them. That's not fun. At Alabama again, so they never do particularly well when they have to go to Alabama. Cal, okay, that's fine. New Mexico, that's fine. But like I see a couple of wins. Oh, they do have Oklahoma, so Oklahoma isn't. That's a close game too. That's probably a couple points. So that's a coin flip there. Like I don't mind betting on teams where it's okay, like a bunch of them are coin flips because the thing is on net they're not going to win all those coin flips, right? And I think I can see Arkansas being a coin flip, Oklahoma being a coin flip, Texas A&M being a coin flip. That's 3 right there. You got a solid enough amount of losses there. There's also the chance that this could just turn belly up and just go really badly for them, right? Like if you start getting something where they lose to Arkansas, look out below. The bottom is just going to fall out of this team, right? Like how far will it go? You've got Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt. Like could they lose to them? Possibly, right? If you start losing some of these games, that's a level you could hit here, right? Actually, oh my God, they played Diego Pavia for 2 years in a row. I just realized that. That's the same quarterback. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I think I figured out my future upset one. There we go. I think we found it already. But this is the thing, right? I am not sold by this Auburn team. I don't think they're good. I don't think they fixed any of the problems in the offseason. Peyton Thorne is not the solution. Yeah, that's my take on this. I will gladly bet an Auburn under here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of legend of Hugh Freeze and not enough Peyton Thorne in this number here. All right, real quick, since we've talked to them a lot, Liberty over 10.5. I just don't see a second loss, even if I disagree with Jackson on the App State. But if I concede that, now you're basically looking at they have to lose. They need an improbable loss to Jacksonville State or Western Kentucky. They get those two at home. I mean, we've talked about Liberty enough. They're just so dominant in this conference. Good for them. Any other more thoughts on Liberty?
I've never heard of Campbell before.
Oh, Campbell, they played a couple FBS teams during the COVID year and made me some good money covering some 56-point spreads. That's about all there is to know about them. I think they're the Owls.
There you go,
but
the Camels.
Yeah, Liberty should be a hefty favorite in that one. But yeah, I don't have a ton to add. They should win 11 games, but being a little bit more bearish on them if they did end up losing a game to Western Kentucky or Jacksonville State would not surprise me. That kind of goes against what my over 7.5 conference wins bet's preaching. The fact that they do get both those teams at home, they should be favorites. And 10 wins is pretty much a guarantee. 11 wins is more than likely.
Yeah. All right. And then the last one, my T-shirt namesake here. I like this. Again, this is against the Lance Leipold play. I have him as a top returning quarterback in the Big 12 from an Apex standpoint. Big improvement year to year under Leipold. The guy's an awesome coach. I think they probably take another step forward. Little concerned in that Kotelnicki, I struggle with that name, goes to Penn State. I don't know what the offense is going to look like without him, but they have a lot of green in all these awesome yardage numbers here. I think they're going to be a touchdown favorite in at least 8 games here, and I have them as a definitive dog only to Iowa State. Now, I have a rational Iowa State love. I don't know what I did with those dashes there, or those asterisks. Just ignore that, unfortunately. Oh, those are at Arrowhead Stadium. They're not on campus, which is interesting. Probably I had this last is probably my smallest play. Big 12 is a flat conference, as we said, but I think they're probably towards the front end of that plateau, if you will. What do you think, Jackson?
Yeah, this is one of those teams that we probably could have made an argument for them to possibly win the conference this year. But until I see Jalen Daniels rather, this isn't a team that I'm super excited to back before the season. Don't get me wrong, if they're looking good, if they roll through Lindenwood, Illinois, UNLV, and then look really good at West Virginia in week 4, then yeah, that might be the time that I end up grabbing a little bit of a sprinkle on them to win the Big 12. So over 8, yeah, I definitely like that. I think I could easily see 9 to 10 wins on this schedule. But with just no certainty at the quarterback position, I think it's been over 300 days since Jalen Daniels touched a football field in a competitive format.
True.
That just gives me a little cause for concern. Doesn't mean I'm not playing a couple other guys that haven't touched the football field in at least a year, but I want to see him, and I want to see how this team looks. And yeah, this might be one of those midseason grabs for me.
Yeah, to your point, since you've been better on the schedules than me, you've got a couple of patsies right here in Arizona State and Houston, and then this is a very kind final 3 at BYU. Tough place to play, but they're still acclimating, to put it nicely. Colorado, I think, is I'll be nice too. I think that these 3 are probably among the bottom half of the conference easily. If you start with those 5 kind of under your, it's not that much of a stretch to get over 8. Any thoughts here, Robert? You gonna join me on the Leipold wagon again?
Yeah, I do. Kansas over. I think last year was very unfortunate. Again, say getting injured right before Texas. Again, Texas kind of caught a break, having to basically not have to play the basically best quarterback in the second best or somewhere around there, one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. Yeah, no, again, very. This is where they duck Utah, they get Colorado. I don't think Colorado's good this year. I don't even know. We're gonna get to this point. I don't even know what Deion Sanders' mental state is going to be by the time we get to week 12 there. God, that could completely fall apart there. You may be a little bit better than last year, but probably not going to have solved all the fully solved all those problems. You've got Kansas State and Iowa State, that's 2. But Illinois, that's definitely winnable. UNLV, Lindenwood. I see 10 wins here, and the number is 8. So this is a definitive overplay for me here.
Yeah, agree, Jackson, on the staying healthy for Jalen Daniels, though. Got to see that. So, all right. National championship and Heisman Trophy winners. I will go first and just say, again, same angle. Kalen DeBoer had an awesome record at Sioux, whatever it was, when he was way back when he was a little kid, and he had multiple national championships there. He got to the title game last season. I like him and Milroe at 14-1. This is all about the price as much as anything else. I think that they're getting overlooked a little bit. You seem to think that was nice-ish in terms of a stretch to get to the SEC conference game. 14-1, is that anything that repulses or entices you or seems fair, Jackson?
It doesn't really wet my whistle. I think I'd probably like closer to 20-1, to be completely honest with you. But if you're going off your narrative of them having a chance to compete in the SEC title game, if you make the title game, it's pretty much presumed that you'll get in the college football playoff. And then you're essentially consider what would be fair price to parlay the money lines for 2 to 3 playoff games. And I think 14-1 is probably about fair, assuming they get the first round bye. But I think probably closer to 21 is what I would look for. Jalen Milroe, I'm still skeptical. How will he work out with Kalen DeBoer? Is he yet to be seen? He makes some boneheaded decisions from time to time too, and
yeah, yes, very fair.
If that luck regression carries over from Washington to Alabama this year, then I think I'd probably like a little bit higher of a price.
Very fair.
What I'll say about Alabama is I said this in yesterday's podcast too. It was very smart of Kalen DeBoer when everything that had made him so successful at Washington left to then immediately say, okay, I'm going to go get another coaching job, right? That was very smart to say I'm leaving at the basically peak of market pressure there on him. The thing is that Washington offense is very different than literally any other SEC offense, very different than Alabama's offense right now. I think he'll probably. The question is, was the Washington offense what he wants to run? I think it was. So in that case, I don't think he's going to be able to just plop that down this year. He's going to need a lot more speed. And to be fair, a lot of those Alabama players did leave. They did bleed some talent in the transfer portal. I think a lot of them had been sticking around because it's like Nick Saban coaches NFL players. I go there, I go to the NFL. I think they lost some of that. This is not to say Kalen DeBoer is not going to be successful at Alabama. I think he has a good chance of being successful, probably longer term. I just don't see it this year. I think they're going to go down a bit this year, and then maybe come up a bit next year, depending on what they can get through the transfer portal, recruitment, and the stuff. But I think longer term, maybe Alabama might come back into their own. But I think this year they might struggle a little bit. But again, struggle with Alabama, does that mean 8 wins or does that mean 10 wins? There's a huge difference there. There's between the 8 and 10 wins. It's a berth in the college football playoff, at which point then you're live even at 14-1 there. So that's really the fundamental question I have about Bama. I put them more to the 8-win Bama than a 10-win Bama, but I could be wrong on that. I don't have a strong opinion on either way on that one.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Fair. So I'm a little bit of a limb there, but it's early. Okay.
It is.
You had 3 ideas here, Jackson, for your national title plays.
Yeah, so I want to say I've bet 8 teams so far to win the national championship. With the new expanded format with 12 teams, my kind of theory is bet on teams that you think can get in. Obviously, you can play the markets for teams to make the playoffs, but high variance events with an oblong shaped ball. And we saw the past 2 years TCU making the title game. I think they were 150-1 at one point. And then last year, Washington, I want to say preseason, they were in the plus 5,000 to 6,000 range. Granted, both those teams got dominated, but I learned my lesson versus Michigan this year. If I have a long shot, they make the title game, get out. I started by my process of looking for teams January 1st. I looked for the longest shots first and worked my way down. A team that I was already bullish on, Utah, grabbed them at 70-1. They're currently 60-1 most places, maybe a little bit worse. But this is strictly a numbers play. If I think Utah wins the Big 12 and they get an automatic berth in the playoffs and a first-round bye, what odds am I going to need to make this fair value? And first round, let's just say even money, parlay that with the plus 350 to win the title, and then whatever, probably be plus 300, plus 350 to like a Georgia possibly in a title game or an Ohio State. I still think that there's a lot of runway to still hedge out of that. And not to mention, if a team wins their conference in the P4, like they've got to be at least in the considerations of a team that you take seriously when it comes to playoffs.
Exactly. If they win their conference, there might not be a tougher team to host. Or would they host if they won? Or would they be in a bowl?
I think the first round is hosted games, and then
So they'd
second,
be out. They wouldn't be in that first round. They'd
Yeah,
theoretically
they'd
have
be
to
in the first
bye.
round. Yeah.
But I think it's neutral sites for the
second round, right?
Yeah, I want to say so.
Yeah.
So to that point, actually, if they don't win, if they just come in second you've got a nice path here. They come in second, and if they can somehow host a first round game at Rice Eccles, who wants to play there in December? The answer is literally zero. Mm-hmm. Nobody. I like that. When I saw that, I thought, but interesting. Okay. Any thoughts on Utah, Robert? This is an interesting little scenario here.
Yeah, it is. My concern is that if they don't win the Big 12, right? If all of a sudden you're the Big 12 number 2 seed, say you have a loss or two, maybe you lost one game and then you lost the Big 12 championship game to say a Kansas or something, then okay, then all of a sudden you're now competing against potentially a 1 or 2 loss Notre Dame, 1 or 2 loss Bama, 1 or 2 loss Florida State potentially, or something like that. There's a lot of teams, and I really worry that with the new format, they're really going to squeeze the Big 12 and the ACC out of spots, where it's going to be like, okay, we'll put Missouri in, we'll put Bama in, we'll put Penn State in, we'll put Ole Miss in. There's a long list of teams that if they have 2 losses and Utah has 2 losses, they're going to put those teams in, right? Basically, your bet is almost completely reliant on Utah winning the Big 12, which, to be fair, is not necessarily a bad bet. That's a good bet because you're getting at 60-1, and then they win the Big 12, and then they probably be a threat in a bowl game, and then, if they're good enough to win the Big 12, they'd probably be a threat in a bowl game, and then basically you're looking at, okay, Georgia, maybe Oregon, and Ohio State would be the only ones you're fighting against. If you can knock off one of them in the semifinal, then all of a sudden you got a 60-1 in the thing. That's not bad, but I'm still a tad iffy on Utah. I don't see it this year. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm still a little iffy on. I'm not willing to pull the trigger on that with Cam Rising yet.
Fair. All right. I think Oregon, the case is pretty self-explanatory at 10-1. Is that what their price is now?
I've seen like mostly 7 and 8 to 1s, but if I could find a 10 to 1 or better, that would be my criteria for making it a bet.
I mean,
I think I did grab a 10-1 somewhere earlier on, I think.
I would think that'd be pretty much north of just their 3-game parlay in the postseason.
Yeah, and that's going back to what I was speaking of the Big Ten futures earlier. I think it's all but, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but it's more than likely that both Oregon and Ohio State make the playoffs. I already have a position on Ohio State, plus 700. That number is definitely nowhere to be found now, and so there's no value. Naturally, that makes my brain go to think, oh, maybe I need to sprinkle a little bit on Oregon to have that covered. I'm essentially able to bet it for free at this rate. So that could have something to do with it. But Oregon, I think Dylan Gabriel, there's going to be a lot of hype around him this year. He could eventually end up being one of the most glorified college quarterbacks of all time, having started at numerous schools and done fairly successfully. So I think, I make plus 1,000 the fair price, and I would play it at fair prices or fair market odds, strictly because I think it would cover a couple other angles for me personally.
And for Robert personally, too, since he's an Oregon guy. So go ahead and get your Oregon talking points in here, bud.
No, I really do Oregon. I thought they were really good last year, and I think they got very unlucky by losing twice to Washington, 2 one-score games. I think if one of those games goes differently, specifically the Pac-12 championship game, they're in the college football playoff, they possibly could have beaten Michigan, right? We don't know, right? I think they were definitely one of the and the injustices of last year with Florida State and stuff, but there was other teams I think that could have been in there as well that could have also done well in the playoff. I think Oregon is one of them as well. I just see that team, and okay, yeah, you lost a couple things. You lost Bo Nix, you lost Troy Franklin, but you keep the running back, you pick up some more pieces, you get Dylan Gabriel. Like, there, you got some stuff there. You've got the talent. You've built out this roster. This roster is in a position to not just compete, but be really good in this Big Ten. And honestly, my take on this is that, okay, we talk about football. Sometimes it's just distilled down to who's the better quarterback, Dylan Gabriel or Will Howard. I got to take Dylan Gabriel there. I'm sorry, I have to take Dylan Gabriel there. And that's just a fact of the matter, right? Okay, maybe you go through and you get Ryan Day's passing attack, and maybe Will Howard will have more yards through the year. Maybe he won't, I don't know. But I think Dylan Gabriel's the better quarterback. And that's why I am on Oregon as well on this. I do Oregon. Again, not the most value play. It's a chalkier play, but I definitely like Oregon.
All right, and then finally, Notre Dame. Let me just frame it this way. As somebody who likes them at 10-plus wins this season, I can't see them winning it. So is this more of a potential hedge play, too, once they get in? Or you really think they have
No, I think it's 100% a setup for a hedge down the road. I think that if you expect a team to get into the playoffs, more likely than not, and to win at least 10 games, Notre Dame, fan favorite, going to be huge to have them on TV in a postseason. Freeman, head coach, I'm a little questionable on how I feel about him. I think he's an up-and-coming guy, but last year, a couple boneheaded decisions where the bright light's going to get to him. So, yeah, this is the one that's more of a setup to where kind of in that same range of if you wanted to put Alabama, Utah, and Notre Dame in the same category of fair odds, I think that plus 2,500 range is pretty fair. Maybe even plus 2,000, I think, would be maybe more in terms of things that prices that I would make them. So just a little extra squeeze on that extra 500 cents of value compared to the plus 2,000 where I make it. But yeah, that would definitely be one that even maybe in the first round, if they were on the road, I would probably have to look to hedge out of that position.
Yeah, I definitely buy that. Robert, you too?
Yeah, I agree that this would be like a play, and you have it in the postseason, and they're in the postseason, and they're like 18-1, maybe 12-1 or something, and then you get to hedge out a plus 200, plus 300 money line against someone else. I think Notre Dame, as a function of them being an independent, you have seen them get when they get into the playoff, they're always the 4 seed, and then they're always going up against oh look, you're now playing the best SEC team. Have fun. This is now the problem, right? Because you'd have this team that could do something, but you always feel like, okay, if they got a game under their belt, if they're actually able to try to do something, maybe get a win and get some confidence, maybe they could take on an Alabama or a Georgia or something, but they don't. But now they're in a position where, yeah, they're maybe going to be the fifth. They may actually, they literally mathematically cannot be a top 4 seed. So I think, I don't know, I don't think they can even be a top 5 seed. I think they can only be six, I think. So the top
They're
five is
excluded from the
reserved.
top four. They're not eligible since they don't have a conference.
No, are they excluded from the top five too? Does it have to, the first five the first conference champions? It doesn't really matter. It's just the I can't remember if they're excluded.
There's
They
no
have to be
Pac-12. There's no Pac-12 now, so you have the
no, but it's the
P4.
non P4. They have the it's a G5 way. It's the top five conference champions
I
from
guess that
the
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
So I'm not whatever. They're either locked into the 5 or the 6 seed, assuming,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and that's still a lot better because it means they're then hosting a
Yep.
lower ranked seed. So you're hosting a Penn State or you're hosting an Ole Miss or something like that. And I think that's where
Yeah.
you can find a lot of value on that, where it's okay. And again, there will be signs through the regular season, right? Notre Dame was pretty shaky last year at times, the loss to Louisville. There will be signs of this Notre Dame team isn't all it's cracked up to be, but those will not be apparent in the rankings. They're going to be dominant in the rankings, but if they're shaky and they almost lose a couple games, people are just going to be like, whatever. But we're going to be like, no. Remember when you almost lost to that team that you shouldn't have lost to? Yeah, we're going to bet Penn State.
Yep. And to your point about basically the popularity contest, that takes me to my Heisman play. Riley Leonard at plus 2,500. I think more offensive weapons. Love the offensive coordinator. I love the transfer of the kid from Florida International. I think the media. I think pretty much everybody who did not attend a school that has a Heisman candidate is dying to give a Heisman to Notre Dame. I definitely see a path here, and 25-1 is a nice price. Did you have any Heisman plays, Jackson? Or
I currently know. I will tell you, I do like the Riley Leonard play. I think he was actually awarded some kind of trophy for being at the Manning Passing Academy recently and looked pretty good out there. I was really high on him last year at Duke, and unfortunately injuries took him out. But the guy's a solid athlete.
yeah,
25-1. Honestly, looking at futures markets, it seems like a lot of value is just gone compared to past years. I haven't calculated the hold on the Heisman markets,
I was
but if
about
it
to
was
ask you
like,
about that. Seems like the
if,
hold's really high on the
yeah,
Heisman.
if it was like 150%, 100 being fair, I wouldn't be surprised. So if there's not a whole lot I like in the Heisman market, I will say this: never ever bet a G5 player to win the Heisman. I don't, just it's not going to happen. No matter what you
Yes.
think, don't do that. A couple years ago, well, quick story: I may or may not have bet Grayson McCall to win the Heisman at Coastal Carolina. I had people tell me I was an idiot. Turns out it is illegal to bet college player props in Colorado. So my bet was voided. Got my money back. So nice little lesson to teach people. So yeah, the fact that there's no Heisman markets available in my state, it makes it one of those less appealing markets where if I'm in Vegas, I can get some money down. I did get burned last year having a Penix Heisman ticket. Of course, it really hurts because Jaden Daniels of LSU ends up
Yeah.
winning it, and I didn't have a ticket on him. After being burnt last year and then just the prices not being what I think are fair, it's hard for me to endorse anyone. I like Riley Leonard as a sprinkle. Dylan Gabriel, I think, should be the outright favorite for numerous reasons. Carson Beck, he's a good quarterback, but is he a great quarterback? Yet to be seen. I think he might have a little trouble with that tough schedule this year. So I think it's the clearest path for Oregon and Dylan Gabriel to win the Heisman. I think Riley Leonard with an easy schedule at Notre Dame and potentially going 11-1 or 12-0. I think that definitely is worth a play.
Any Heisman plays, Robert?
I've got three. Basically, yeah, Carson Beck is the favorite. I agree in fading that. Yes, Georgia was really good last year. Couple of a little shaky moments. They did go undefeated through the regular season, but then they lost to Alabama. One thing I will note is that Georgia's regular season win total is 10.5. Now it's shaded to the over, but last year their win total was 11.5, and it was like I think a plus 120 for them to go undefeated. Now that doesn't seem like a big difference, but it actually is because it's basically saying, guess what, guys? The SEC is getting more competitive. There are more better teams, and they have to play those better teams. You're not getting, oh, okay, you have two tough games and that's it. Now you have three, you have four tough games. Georgia does play Texas. I think they play Alabama, right? They have some tough teams on the schedule. There could be a couple of losses in here, and Georgia usually wins through defense. They're not particularly an offensive team. They win. Yes, the number on the screen looks big, but there's a lot of defensive touchdowns, a lot of short fields generated by that defense. And I think that's fundamentally why people are like, oh, they're so good. They scored so many points this year. No, but a lot of that was from the defense. A lot of short fields and stuff like that. I agree with you. I don't understand why Dylan Gabriel is not the favorite for the Heisman. Bo Nix almost won it last year in Oregon and function what I would assume to be basically the same offense. So that's a huge thing. I don't understand why he's not the outright favorite. I also felt the burn from Jaden Daniels last year. Again, I was on Bo Nix to win the Heisman. Probably should have won it had he beaten Washington in that game, but they didn't. And I still don't understand why we decided to reward Jaden Daniels. So my other plays are I just want stats. I just want guys who are going to put up insane numbers, and apparently that's what gives you Heisman's. My two other plays are Miller Moss and Nico Lamalea. That's it. 3 plays. Because if I'm not going, because this is, I made the assumption last year that the Heisman would be determined similar to the NFL MVP, where it's like the best quarterback on the best ish team, and that went to Lamar Jackson because he was on the Ravens, and the Ravens beat the 49ers. If it's a weird kind of thing, but my assumption was that you were going to give it to like the best stats guy, and that would have been Oregon on probably one of the best teams. But if you're not betting that, and you should always obviously have some of that, but if you're not having that, just go for guys who are going to put up insane stats. Miller Moss, USC, could have 5,000 passing yards. That's a play. Nico Lamalea, same thing. Shredded Iowa's defense. What's he going to do in Tennessee? Those are the plays where I'm like, I love this guy to have like insane numbers of stats. And you get those 20, 30, 40 to 1. I think I got Miller Moss at 50 to 1 at one point. Some of these are insane numbers for some of these guys. And I think if you're not betting for like best quarterback on on a playoff team, it's like you just go for a guy who's going to have insane stats. And to be fair, they could also, we've talked about, we like USC to potentially make the college football playoff. We like Tennessee to potentially make the college football playoff too. If they have insane stats, maybe they're not going to win a conference championship game. But if you have Miller Moss has 5,000 passing yards and they're going to the college football playoff, that might be good enough for a Heisman. The way we live here, right? That's the world we live in here, and I think that's not a bad bet.
That is a great way to wrap it up. Robert, an Oregon guy, likes Miller Moss more than I do because I'm the Notre Dame guy. And that is college football, folks. Jackson, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Amazing insight, and we'll be checking in with you. Thank you so much. Robert, I think next up is maybe Conference USA. Until then, thank you, everybody.
So, yeah.
Thanks for having me.